All right, hello, welcome. My name is Shaina. I'm an astrologer, and today we're continuing my little Saturn mini series. Today's video is about transit Saturn through the houses. Okay, so I told you everything that you need to know about Saturn and Aries specifically, and Saturn in my last video, which I will link in the cards right here. And so today's video is expanding in that. Okay, so now that you have that backstory about Saturn, how is it affecting you? How is it affecting your individual chart? That's what I'll be talking about today. Before I get any further into the video, let me just get some advertising out of the way. So I sell birth chart readings on my website, shainaemily.com. I have full-length readings there, so I have natal chart readings, synastry readings, transit readings, solar return readings, and I also have a TikTok at shaina.emily. I post there very frequently, and I go live every Thursday at 5:30 p.m. Pacific time. And I also have a backup account just in case at shaina.emily_backup. But let's just get right into the bulk of the video. So if you do not know how to find out what house Saturn is transiting for you currently, I use the Placidus system. I am a Placidus tropical astrologer. So this video is timeless, but if you happen to be watching it when it's being posted, Saturn is going through Aries currently, will be entering Aries May 25th. So you need to find your 0-degree Aries point in your chart, and that will tell you what house Saturn is currently transiting through. If you're a little confused, I talk about it in my video where I talk about what Neptune in Aries actually means. I talk about it at the very end, and I describe how to find where transit Neptune falls in your chart, but because both Neptune and Saturn are moving into Aries, it's actually the exact same thing for Saturn right now, except replace when I say Neptune with Saturn, okay? But as I mentioned, this video is timeless, so this is not about specific Saturn in Aries transit through the houses. I might touch on it every now and then, but this is a timeless video. So even if you're watching this when Saturn is in Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, whatever Saturn sign it is in, this is just a general blanket video about transit Saturn through the houses, okay? So if you're wanting to interpret it for the specific Saturn sign, you need to add that flavor onto it, okay? I guess I'll also say that transits also have a lot to do with what your natal placements are doing. You might have a better experience with a specific Saturn transit than other people, maybe because that energy just shows up a little differently in your chart. Something that might seem really hard as a Saturn transit can be really beneficial for you, and vice versa. So that's just something always to keep in mind. I try to isolate the energy is kind of what I try to do in these videos. You know, I say if we're talking about no other things in, you know, in astrology, and we're only talking about this specific energy in all my videos, everything, this is how it shows up. Does that make sense? So you have to remember that you are not an isolated being, that you do not experience any of these transits in isolation. So please always keep in mind the rest of your chart. And if you struggle to interpret what all this stuff means layered on top of it, I do not struggle to interpret it. That's my job. So that's what I sell transit readings on my website, shainaemily.com, for if you want one. But yeah, so timestamps are obviously down below and in the video. And I'm going to start with transit Saturn through the first house, okay? So after transit Saturn went through your 12th house, you went through a long period of finding your inner solitude, your inner sanctity, and you basically completed a little bit of a dark night of the soul. So it is now time to step up and out into the world, kind of showing off the inner discipline you hopefully cultivated during your Saturn in the 12th house time. This is definitely one of those things when any planet goes over your ascendant. This is a big shift. This is the start of a new cycle. So especially if you're an Aries rising or a Pisces, late degree Pisces rising maybe, you know, and Saturn in Aries is going to be kicking off at the start of your chart. This is really, really, really emphasizing a new set of rules, discipline. If Saturn in the 12th house, maybe you created some kind of like religious discipline, you know, but it was very internalized. It was something that you kept to yourself. It was something that you didn't share. You became, you know, you contacted your inner monk, right? But when Saturn moves through the first house, it's now time to live your life externally under those values as well. This can sometimes be something as literal as, well, I've been acting like a monk. It's time I dress like one and, you know, eat like one. And I'm using monk. It's such a goofy example, but it's just 12th house. But the likelihood of it being a literal monk is low. But you know what I'm trying to say? It's like a good example. What I'm trying to say is there's this cycle of death, rebirth, and life, I think, that happens in the 12th house. Another way that this can also go as well, like when Saturn was in your 12th house, you might have had no discipline at all. And like, it can go a very different way. Instead of creating a lot of inner self-discipline and creating a lot of like inner reliability, you might have, you know, gone the anti-Saturn route and rejected that and just kind of like gotten away with not doing anything. And in that case, when Saturn moves into your first house, time's up for for you. Sorry. You know what I mean? Maybe during your 12th house Saturn, you were getting taken care of. When Saturn moves through your first house, that's probably not going to happen anymore. You probably are going to have to take more responsibility for yourself, especially, you know, if you're watching this when it's in Aries. This is a lot about autonomy and selfishness and making your own independent decisions, especially when it's in something like Aries, okay? No matter what though, when Saturn moves through your first house, this is a time to grow up, but it is kind of in a superficial way. That doesn't always mean that it feels superficial, right? What I mean by superficial is externally showing that you grew up, you know, dressing like it, you know, looking and holding yourself more like it, right? Even if you went through this when you were 5, like, right, you know, maybe that just meant you're getting up, you're walking, you're talking, you're holding yourself more like a grown-up, you know what I mean? Like, this can be at any time of your life, but this was really a kind of like a call to arms as far as like, okay, now you have like built an inner grown up with Saturn in the 12th house. So now it's time to show that off. Does that make sense? There's going to be lots of lessons in how you interact with others and how you come across. Definitely, you can face a lot of just direct criticism when Saturn comes into your first house. Just people being like, why are you dressing like that? Why are you holding yourself like that? Why are you acting like that? Why are you coming at me like that? Like, who knows? Especially whatever zodiac sign that Saturn is in is going to show kind of like what people are going to get upset at you about, or what people are going to say about you, you know, or how people are going to ridicule you or criticize you, right? You know, if with Saturn and Aries, people are going to be like, you know, maybe to men, like, you're not masculine enough. And maybe to women, you're too masculine. You know, that could be like a thing with Saturn and Aries going through your first house. You may feel a little obligated to act perfect or present perfectly at all times. Especially because like with Saturn in the first house, there's usually a very literal authority figure showing up very prominently in your life. And if there isn't, then that authority figure is you. But the chances are that that is you, and it also shows up as some father authoritarian figure in some way in your life that is very much, you know, making you feel like you need to act perfectly and act presentably at all times, right? This can be a hard transit, I think, if you go through it when you're too young. I definitely think this is a better transit to more be going through once you hit your later years, like 18 and up especially. Like, that's a really great time to be going through this transit. But I think when you're young, it can just make you feel like, why do I have to grow up so fast all of a sudden? Like, where did this come from? Like, you're just making my meals last week, you know, with Saturn going through the 12th house. And now all of a sudden, you're not even teaching me how to cook, you know? Like, sometimes it can be a little bit like that. You may feel such invisible, heavy obligations that it can really inhibit your freedom or your sense of self. You may also struggle to approach people, right? You may be a little bit more cautious saying hi to people, meeting new people, potentially maybe because you feel like maybe you've been locked away for so long with Saturn in your 12th house that you're like, oh my God, how do I do this people thing again? Or maybe even because you're just so nervous that, you know, whoever you're going to go up to is going to criticize or say something mean to you or judge you or something along those lines, right? Your physical body can become a focus, which can result in some self-esteem issues and some confidence issues, but truly, you have to see it not as self-esteem issues, confidence issues. You have to see it as Saturn testing your self-esteem, Saturn testing your confidence, and maybe that's worse for some people to hear. Now I'm actually saying it out loud. But for me, it makes it makes it feel better because I'm like, oh, so it's not that I have these lifelong issues. It's just that, you know, Saturn is seeing if I'll fail or I'll live up to the test or not. You know what I mean? Like, there's a little bit more control that you have over it, right? Like, you don't need to have self-esteem issues the entirety while Saturn goes through your first house, but the world will be testing you and seeing if you do and poking at it and prodding at it, especially with it in Aries. So it's like, yeah, you know, especially in Aries, you know, you're up for that challenge, right? You can really build and grow like amazing, resounding confidence with this energy if you're willing to abide by its tests or try to take its lessons in, or whatever you might want to say. And just in general, you may take on more of a serious tone, maybe in the way that you talk, in the way that you approach the world for some reason or another. This can even be somebody that went through a really serious loss and it felt like a piece of them, you know, died. And, you know, now they have to find their life without that person or something along those lines. Can also be a theme with this energy. You may dress more modestly or more conservatively as well. With Saturn and Aries specifically, I feel like it would be more like you're not going to dress modestly and conservatively, and you are going to be like probably highly ridiculed for it. Even if you are dressing moderately or conservatively, you might still be ridiculed for it. You know what I mean? Like, we might see, I wonder if Saturn and Aries will see like a resurgence of people critiquing women's clothes, and maybe I won't be allowed to wear the things that I wear anymore. I'm like, oh, I'm not gonna let that happen though. That's terrible. Anyways, you may struggle to show happiness or excitement like you used to, right? This can be something like you're like, oh, I'm getting older, right? I'm taking on a more serious tone. I have a more serious outlook, right? Your outlook can go from being internally serious with Saturn in the 12th house to externally serious with Saturn in the first house. Definitely rips away any of the superficial ideas that you held about yourself. Anything that you're a fraud for, I think will be just like put on display, like not in a 10th house way. It'll be put on display with like your close to the people close around you, like, and you'll have to see it too. You'll have to confront it too. So if there's anything that you talk the talk but you don't walk the walk with, I do think that Saturn and Aries in the first house, if you're going through that transit, will expose that. But if you are who you say you are, that will be exposed in the best way possible, and people will finally take you seriously, right? I think this can be great if you're somebody that has been wanting to be taken seriously their whole life, and felt like that you were never. Finally, people will be like, oh my God, this person has something to say. Maybe they have some way they can lead me. Maybe they have some way that they can teach me, or, you know, whatever. Maybe they have something to say, or some, you know, maybe Aries thing, some new idea, who knows, right? So this can be good. Like if you're not a fraud, this would be great for you. You can feel like, finally, I'm getting the respect I deserve, you know? Speaking of, yeah, that makes sense. I said, you know, do not try to get away with, I capitalized on my notes. I said, do not try to get away with things during this time like you might have been able to do with Saturn in the 12th house, right? Saturn in the first house, especially in Aries, the karma is swift and quick, right? If you have this placement natally down below, you can let everyone know that's going through it. But I think even people with Saturn in the first house, even if it's retrograde, even if it's intercepted, I still think that the reign and the hand of Saturn and the fist of Saturn does come down on them really strong. Like, which I don't feel that way with a lot of, you know, other maybe intercepted retrograde Saturn placements. But oh my God, I feel like even with Saturn transiting Aries, Saturn going, you know, Saturn natally in Aries, like the karma is swift and true, you know? In that way, you can get these really big rewards. Like this can even be something that, if this is such a goofy example, but this is honest, right? Like, well, Saturn was going through Pisces in your 12th house. Maybe you got a skincare routine, and maybe you had extreme discipline while doing that skincare routine, and it was like a healing thing for you, right? And you like got your privacy, right? That when Saturn in your first house, that discipline can show on your face, right? To where your face is clear and beautiful and lovely. But if you didn't do your skincare routine when Saturn's in your 12th house and you neglected it, then the acne is going to show on your face. You know what I mean? It's one of those things. And that makes sense. I said it's an extremely literal Saturn transit. It is. It's just watch, if you have Saturn going through Aries, especially in your first house, just watch my Saturn in Aries video, all those themes, that's your life. Congratulations, that whole video is like so for you. You know what I mean? Like there's the other extra layers like self-discipline, you know what I mean? Oh, the last thing that I will say is you may have to become your father or become a father / parent or take on a fatherly role to somebody or something. Even if you're a woman, you might have to wear the pants. You might have to take care of that thing and provide for someone or something, or provide for yourself and become that father role like a man does. You know what I mean? Or you may feel like your father's expectations or identity becomes projected onto you. You know, if you're young and your father's very much around and very much taking care of you, and your father is that Saturn in the first house transit that's showing up, you may feel like everybody says you're so much like your dad. You act just like your dad. All you are is your dad. And you may feel like you lose your identity to becoming a little bit of this expectation of your father. You know what I mean? So there can be heavy expectations. Even if you aren't living with him, there can be heavy expectations in that way. This can even be a situation, this is random, but like if your parents are getting divorced, maybe you're actually going with your dad or something like that, or you're taking your dad's side or something, or everybody says you would act like your dad in this situation, you know, like maybe you guys are getting a divorce and then everybody puts on you that like, well, you would act just like him, and you're like, what the fuck? You know what I mean? Like it can be, you know, just like, that was just like a random example, but it can be something, you know, weird stuff like that. It's not projection, it's like direct projection. Does that make sense? I feel like 7th house is like indirect projection, like where you're not saying that you're projecting, whereas the first house, everybody's like, hey, I'm projecting that you're your father onto you. You know what I mean? With the 7th house, it's like your father projecting themselves onto you, whereas in the first house, it's like everybody saying you're like your father. They're confirming that. They're saying that's your identity. In the 7th house, people project onto you what they are, but they don't realize it. Okay. Transit Saturn through the 2nd house. Okay, so again, we're coming from the 1st house. Okay, so now that you present more professionally, you are stronger in yourself and your identity and your discipline, and you have learned your lessons, Hopefully, at least that's what you were supposed to do when Saturn was transiting your first house. So now that Saturn is transiting your second house, it's time for your values to catch up, okay? It's time for your surroundings to catch up. Does that make sense? Now that you have been tested in yourself and your confidence, it is now time to test your ability to have that manifest physically. You've created and cultivated this inner discipline in the 12th house that you then showed to people and presented to people and gained respect from others in the first house and from yourself too, especially yourself. And then when it moved in the second house, now your items can kind of reflect that respect. At least that's how it should ideally go. Now, a lot of times if we maybe aren't aware what Saturn's trying to teach us, or we feel like Saturn is attacking us, or we succumb to it, or it's, sometimes maybe it's like such an intense transit that it's just too much, which is understandable, right? There can be this, total lack and falter of self-esteem during Saturn in the first house. So much so that when Saturn goes through the second house, it completely takes away all of your belongings and takes away all of your value, right? Saturn can build and it can give just as much as, not in a plutonic way does it destroy. It just, I think, just stops rewarding when you refuse to learn your lesson is what I think it is, right? So this is somebody that can go broke, basically, because they lack confidence, they then go broke, right? But this can also be somebody that built confidence, that then now what they have around them is this established an amazing sense of security and stability. And honestly, when Saturn goes through the second house, maybe you'll feel a little bit of both. You very well might experience both, or very much be like during one of your Saturn in the second house transits, it experienced the height of it. And then the next one experienced the low of it. And the next one experienced the height of it. You know what I mean? It can be one of those things too. But anyways, basically now that you know yourself, it's time to grow your assets. At least that's how I think it should be seen. All right, so when Saturn transits your second house, it challenges not only, like when I say values, I feel like people don't expand on that. Like values, what does that mean? At least that's what I always think whenever people say values. I'm like, what does that fucking mean? Basically, I think it's like your morals, your principles. Like I think of second house energy. When I think of second house energy, I know he's a Taurus. It's not technically second house, but I think of George Carlin. The way he presents and stands on his morals and the way he explains them, even if you disagree, even if you agree, doesn't matter, has always, to me, it feels like that's how somebody with second house feels about things. Does that make sense? No matter how they feel about it, it has this tone and intonation. It can be a lot more political, in my opinion, than you think. Not that it directly correlates to politics, but people with second house stelliums and second house energy tend to be some of the most opinionated people you will meet in your entire life, and the most stubborn people about it ever. So just putting that out there. Another thing with Saturn in the second house is asking yourself, do your habits control you more than you control them? Right? That's a big thing that can happen with Saturn in the second house. Your habits can really take over, and your habits can become your sense of security and your sense of routine, and maybe even your sense of pleasure. So I don't know. Basically, you need to make sure that you're controlling your habits and that they're not controlling you when Saturn goes through the second house. And you will have a lot of lessons about what your habits are that you don't realize even are. We all know alcohol or something, as blatantly obvious as that. But maybe your habit is going to the grocery store and only picking up 2 things every day to avoid what you're doing, right? And to never actually go on a full grocery shop, so then you don't have a full pantry of food, so then you have an excuse, and then you never have to make food. So then you can always complain that you never have food, but then you get to go to the grocery store every day to pick up an item or 2. You know what I mean? Like that is a very second house habit, in my opinion. Especially like avoiding things, like avoiding work is also very second house. But also I should say second house deals with manual labor. Okay, that's another big thing that I think, I don't know, I don't think I've ever heard people talk about, but it's manual labor, guys, right? If we're stacking the workhouses, that's how they stack up, right? Second house is manual labor. And a lot of people with second house energy have to do a lot of manual labor. And so there can be themes of, are you able to do the manual labor that is required in life? And if you aren't, do you have the funds to be able to pay somebody to do that, right? That stuff comes up, guys, okay? This is also like big, like either somebody becoming a provider or somebody looking for a provider. That can be also a big theme with Saturn in the second house. Honestly, I think with Saturn in the second house, it's more about you being the one that's the provider. It depends on your natal chart, actually. But with Aries, it's probably you becoming the provider for your own life. That's probably what Aries Saturn in the second house is all about. Stop asking other people for money. Stop giving people money. Just take care of yourself, I think, is the lesson with Saturn and Aries going to the second house. Just make sure you have yourself, okay? But no matter what sign Saturn goes through, when it goes through your second house, it's time to take your finances seriously, or more serious, okay? No matter how serious you took them before, it's time to amp that up a little bit, okay? It's time to start saving, whether that's for your future or for your children's future. This can be definitely one of those placements where you're saving for your kids or you're saving for a legacy thing. That is what a lot that Saturn has to do with. It's not just you, it's not just your future, it's your children's future and your children's children's future, right? This is the time to do something really boring like get life insurance, right? This is the time, I'm not saying you're going to pass, but this is a great time to do it. Saturn will be so happy and proud of you. You know what I mean? This is the time to like just make those like really practical fiscal decisions that are like really boring, but like Saturn will be like, oh my God, yes, like queen, you know what I mean? And if you don't do them, Saturn will be like, should have listened to that girl on that video that told you to do that. It also, to me, would make sense. I do think this can be a little bit of a marriage indicator, right? Just like Saturn in the 7th house can be, I think Saturn in the 2nd house can be as well. It would make sense if you got married during this transit, as, you know, it ruled by Venus. Now, you can get married during any Saturn transit, but there's more of a connotation of love being involved in the marriage when Saturn goes through the 2nd house. Does that make sense? But there can also be a motivation of finances as well. There can also be a gaining of assets. The 2nd house has less to do with the merging of assets and the more to do with like, how do we manage the fact that we have two different incomes? There's usually a little bit of a separation there with 2nd house stuff. Possessive over your things. Saturn in the 2nd house is giving very Four of Pentacles vibe. I know that's a Capricorn card, so it makes sense. Basically hanging on to everything for your dear life. Just a lot of lessons in general and how you deal with your things. I shouldn't say that you're hanging on to your things for dear life because that could be very false depending on your natal placements. Maybe it's just a lesson in how you treat your things, what you keep and what you don't keep. Realizing I should have kept this, I shouldn't have kept this. Realizing I'm a hoarder. Realizing I give away everything that means something to me. Realizing that I don't have anything to pass on to my family. Realizing I keep way too many things from my family and I need to be more discerning, right? There's just a lot of lessons around the things that you keep around you. But also the big thing with the 2nd house that people don't understand is that it's also how you treat your things. And in that way, it is also how you treat the people around you that you possess, that you're married to, or that are your kids, that you feel some ownership to, right? There's a lot of possessive themes with Saturn in the 2nd house. You can find that there can be somebody really possessive over you, or especially financially. You can find that you're possessive over somebody else financially. You are in charge of somebody else's finances. You have kids and you're in charge of their finances. You know, you have a partner that you're in charge of their finances, that you're the earner. You know what I mean? It can go many ways. But there's a real authoritarian presence, though, within the realm of money and finances. This can also be a time where Saturn clears out all the things that you had that were not meaningful, right? So any item that you have that holds maybe some bad energy, that is just not necessary, that's taking up unwanted space, this is definitely some time to do some spring cleaning. But you need to do the spring cleaning in keeping with Saturn, right? You need to keep the things that in the long term you'll want. You have to think long term when Saturn goes through your 2nd house with your items, right? Think in 20 years, would my kid really like this? Like, would my kid think this was cool? I should maybe keep it. Think in 6 months, I might be moving. Yeah, I don't need these boxes right now, but maybe I actually should keep them, right? That's something that maybe when Saturn wasn't going through your 2nd house, you just get rid of them because you're like, obviously these boxes are taking up space. But that's the thing about Saturn in the 2nd house. It's about lessons. It's about being discerning. It's not saying just get rid of everything. It's saying actually you need to keep those boxes. But what you really need to get rid of is the food in the back of your fridge, right? That you're ignoring. You know what I mean? So it's not just about throwing everything out. It's about being discerning about what is meaningful and what should be in your life and what does not need to be in your life item-wise. And, you know, sometimes human-wise, unfortunately, because we can be conscious about who we're possessive over, right? So we may also realize we're possessive over somebody, and vice versa. Oh, this is a very practical time in your life, honestly, full of hard work. As I mentioned, manual labor. Also, there can be themes of hand-me-down items. Like you might have hand-me-down clothes. Like I said, you know, there can be lots of like thrifting, all that kind of stuff, right? You know, flipping, you know, taking something old and making it new, buying an old house and renovating it. All that stuff is super common. You know, antiquing, whatever. Saturn in the 2nd house is all those kinds of vibes. You may also develop very strong feelings about how finances should be handled one way or another after this transit, because you truly did not understand the value of a dollar before this transit. You think you did, but you don't. Now you know what you do about earning your own money after this transit. You'd probably do it all differently, right? But it's okay, right? As long as you learn. Also, you know, financial success can come from this transit, but it will be slow and it will take hard work. Anything less, you will honestly be penalized for. So big theme, Saturn in the second house: building self-worth autonomously, finding financial security. Finding financial independence is more Saturn and Aries in the second house. Finding financial security in some way, form, or shape is just general Saturn in the second house. And then no matter how much people push against or test your morals, your principles, your values, will you stay true to them? This is a big thing. Will you stand by them? Okay? Your morals, your values, your value system will be tested time and time again. Will you stay by it? Will you stay true? And also, I think there are themes of the man with Saturn in the second house. I don't know why. You get that vibe, right? Saturn in the second house gives the vibe of like the man, right? Because there's always that proverbial like father authority figure. I know that's like 11th housey too. Like the man talks about like finances, money, right? Not just the government, right? There's also like the man financially. I don't know. I think that's second house. Does that make sense? Guys, people don't talk about the second house much. I'm just trying to talk about it. All right, Saturn going through your third house. So again, this is coming from your second house, okay? So now that you've established your own set of values and principles, maybe even bought a house, rented an apartment, bought a car, I don't know, something like that, you know, got some life insurance, put some money in a 401k, got an IRA, I don't know, did something smart like that. It is now time to reassess your community. You know, where you live, you know, who your neighbors are. Do they align with you? You know, that can be one of, you know, this is a metaphorical journey. It might not be as literal as this, but that's kind of the vibe, right? You know, another vibe is like the toddler that is now sent off to school, that has to learn to share the items that was once theirs, you know, only theirs, that has to learn to interact with siblings and friends, and that needs to just learn how to learn, right? You're going to learn that you have to learn things, and you have to learn the alphabet, right? All that kind of stuff. Language does come into play really heavily as well with Saturn in the third house. This can also be a theme where if you did not establish security during Saturn in the second house, that you are now going to have to face the harsh reality that you might have to live in a less than desirable neighborhood because you did not set yourself up properly. You may have to live with less than desirable roommates. You may have to live in a less than desirable community, you know? It can also be one of those things as well. So when Saturn moves through your third house, the third house has many implications, and I do feel like people forget a lot of them. So just to list them all off, okay, this is the themes, right? Neighborhood, local community, siblings, immediate family, split family, which is like half siblings, step siblings, right? Divorces even is very common with third house stuff. Lower schooling, education, being a student, right, of any sort, as well as how your brain works, how it functions, and how it organizes things on a day-to-day basis. It's the communicative part of our brain. I'm only saying that because I do think people have a little bit of a shallow view of the third house, which is very Gemini shallow, right? But it deals with a lot more, it's very like house, and it's like people with a lot, it's like third house is very chaotic energy, right? So Saturn going through it is a little like weird because Saturn wants to be like a stabilizing energy, and the third house is very unstabilized. It's not very intuitive in my opinion. The things that you have learned are now being held up to a spotlight, okay? Your intelligence is being questioned. How do you learn? How well do you concentrate? How well do you focus, right? All of these things are coming into play. You also need to assess the ways that you think and operate that are outdated and don't help you anymore. It is time to let go of those things. This is also a little bit more of a depressive energy. You can feel a little bit more melancholic in your mind, melancholic in the things that you say. Maybe people say you're suddenly taking on a more pessimistic tone. You may be, I'm just being realistic for the first time in my life. You know, that may be something. You know, you can get more serious about the way you communicate, the way you speak, the words that you say, right? This can be a real kind of like intelligence, you know, booster where you kind of gain a lot of smartness from this energy, right? But when Saturn was going through my third house, I was taking school very, very seriously. I mean, I always just took school very seriously, but it definitely added an extra weight to things, you know? This is a very common energy that if you're wanting to go back to school or go to school or take, you know, classes in any way, form, and shape, I would highly, highly encourage that. This is something to really hone your interests as well, right? Be more discerning about what interests are worth your time. You may also live somewhere where their native language is not the language of others around you. So you may feel a little ostracized, and Saturn can come in because maybe you have to learn a new language. You have to learn the language of the people around you. Maybe there's some language barrier. That's so Saturn in the third house, just a language barrier of any sort coming into play. This can also, as I mentioned, impact your neighborhood. When I had this when I was a kid was when I became outcasted from my neighborhood, from my friends that I had grown up with my whole life. I think a lot of it is because you learn the lessons. That's at least what I felt. I felt like I was learning the lessons of how groups work, right? It was a very like Three of Pentacles, Three of Cups, you know, kind of feeling, right? Saturn in the third house, it makes sense. But like reversed, right? Where you're learning the realities of friend groups where there's gossiping, there's talking behind each other's back, there's ousting each other and you never get explanation why, right? There's pettiness, there's miscommunications, right? There's all that third house stuff that comes into the complexities of these inner little dynamics and group dynamics, right? And that was something that was really hard for me to learn. There's also a big focus on your mental output. There's a pressure to put out ideas. And also I think you might feel a little bit slower mentally. Like it might be a little bit more challenging potentially for you to remember things or for you to stay organized. But that might be exactly what your focus needs to be. You may also feel like you have to like catch up intellectually. It might be intelligence wise. Like my neighbors were all, as I mentioned this before, 1 to 3 years older than me. So, you know, when I learned how to spell September, that wasn't very impressive, you know? So there might be some intellectual catch up that needs to happen. And there can be a lot of intellectual determination. This can also be somebody that if you aren't sure about your opinions on things, you can really form very strong opinions about things. And those opinions might very well be the thing that ostracizes you from your groups, from your community, from, you know, your neighborhood. You know, I always thought that. I was like, I think a big reason why they don't like me is because I'm very outspoken about how I feel about Hannah Montana and Miley Cyrus and Gossip Girl, you know? It can be goofy sometimes, you know what I mean? Like I was so little, but it is very Saturn in the third house. Like I was very opinionated. I was stating my opinion. And basically Saturn is going to challenge things, right? So am I going to stand by my opinion that I'm not a big Hannah Montana fan? Or am I going to go with the flow and like Hannah Montana just because everybody else likes it? You know, I decided to say, no, I don't like Hannah Montana. I don't have to. It's okay that I don't, you know, and I stood by it. But that's basically what Saturn will do. It'll test, you know, are you going to stand by your opinions? Are you going to stand by the things that you say? Also, if you live a split life, this is going to be exposed, okay? You will learn those lessons, right? There can show up, again, issues with a split family, issues with a split household. That's huge. Split household, right? Oh, that's big. You know, custody battles. I think, you know, yeah, that's 8th house stuff, but dude, I think that could be Saturn in the 3rd house too, for sure, right? Divorce, even Saturn in the 3rd house sometimes. Just, you know, divorce because of a wandering eye, like dead ass, right? Divorce because of a man with a wandering eye, dead ass. You know, divorce because of a father with a wandering eye, dead ass, right? Like that's so Saturn in the 3rd house. Okay. Also, you might feel like that childlike curiosity is not really allowed to exist anymore. This is another one of those placements that I think it's best to go through when you're a little bit older for your first time, just because that childlike curiosity and that childlike, you know, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed quality in you becomes dead, right? Like this is totally like a 16-year-old energy to me. Like if you went through this when you were 16, 17, 18, you know, 19, that would make sense because it's total like, it can be a total like, fuck the world. Like I don't believe in the positive, Disneyland Christmas bullshit that I used to. Authoritarian teachers that can limit your creative thoughts and your creative mind is another really big thing. Grades. Grades can come really into play with this energy. That's why I said it's very common to be at school or go to school or be in some kind of course. Gains a greater depth of understanding, just in general, just about little things in life, all right? This can also really limit the thoughts or the things that you say. Oh, also there can be sibling issues. Like, even if you don't have a split family, there can be real issues with your siblings, even issues with a sibling that you didn't used to have issues with. You know what I mean? You can have problems with them all of a sudden, potentially because of differing opinions. Again, limiting your thoughts or things that you say, probably quiet because you feel ridiculed for everything you say. You must learn to push through it, which is Saturn, right? Transit Saturn through the 4th house. Okay, so coming from the 3rd house, this can go a few ways, right? Maybe one of those ways is feeling like that little kid that had immense pressure to perform at school. And now that pressure is like unescapable, right? It's not just at school, it's also in the home. It's everywhere you go, everything you do, in every facet of every life. It can feel like there is this real heightened and expansion of expectations, right? And it can feel like you really have to grow up for the family. Another thing is, now that you've established your neighborhood and community through Saturn in the 3rd house, it is time to grow your roots. The way that I would love for this to go, Saturn in the 1st house, confident, badass bitch. Saturn in the 2nd house, through your confidence and belief in yourself, you establish some kind of financial security. Saturn in the 3rd house, now you have your neighborhood and community to match up with this financial security and this new sense of self that you have cultivated. You have the community around you to support that. And now that you have the community around you to support that, you can now grow your roots, stabilize, steady your life, and potentially even create a family or create some kind of grounding or something along those lines, right? That's how we want this stuff to go. That's how we want these transits to happen. Now, how this can also go is during Saturn in your 1st house, you allowed it to squash all your confidence and you succumb and became victim-minded. So much so that you were like, I can't even take care of myself. I can't even get a job. I am broke and there's nothing I can do about it, when Saturn was transiting your 2nd house. Then when Saturn was transiting your 3rd house, it was like, oh, well, I guess I'll just live with these random people, or I also just put myself in this horrible environment and I'll live with these shitty people because I have no value. I have no self-esteem, right? And then what happens when Saturn moves through your 4th house? You hit rock bottom. Okay, maybe you have to move back in with your family. Maybe your family has to move back in with you. Maybe you're homeless. Maybe you realize it's a rock, whatever. It's just, you just can hit rock bottom. Like, that's can really what this can show that. Another thing I said is, now that you've outcasted yourself from playing outside with Saturn in the 3rd house, it's now time to stay home and play The Sims. Okay, when Saturn moves through your 4th house, all right, building and establishing roots, a family, a home, all that kind of stuff. I spent so much time around my grandparents when Saturn was in the 4th house, let me tell you. Okay, again, issues within the family, issues within the home, okay? Problems, and you're now the person that has to step up to the plate and deal with them, right? Like, you can feel like you are the father figure in the household. You are the authoritarian figure in the household. I think this was also when I started being left home alone. I didn't have to have babysitters. I hated having babysitters, so my parents just wound up leaving me home alone most evenings, which is, I think, a very Saturn in the 4th house theme. I was independent, responsible for my own meals, responsible to do my own homework, responsible to take care of myself, and honestly, I did not mind it. I might have had a split or separation with Saturn in the 3rd house, as I mentioned, a divorce or something, a split family, that can then progress into issues within that home or family, right? Like, now that there's a split family, how do you rebuild that structure after it's been broken? That can be another theme with Saturn in the 4th house. Rethinking what you really want from your home life and rethinking what you really want your home life to look like. There can also be an immense authoritarian pressure or presence in the home. This may show up as a very literal father, or like a very literal, like, you are the dad, you have kids, you have a dad, you are the kid, and that dad is dadding all the way. You know what I mean? Like, my dad was being a dad, and he was being a dad's dad, dadding all around. You know what I mean? Extreme expectations from the home and from the family. Extraordinarily large shoes to fill. There's definitely an expectation to build a lot of inner confidence, inner resolve, right? Inner grit. Another one of those energies where you have to grow up fast. I mean, obviously all of these energies have some way, form, or shape where you have to grow up. That's the whole point of Saturn. But with Saturn in the 4th house and the 3rd house, because it's like Gemini and Cancer, these are, to me, the most directly like childlike, toddler, little kid sort of energies, in my opinion. So I do think that these two houses are a very literal display of having to grow up, in my opinion, no matter what age you are. If you're young, you are being parentified in some way. That's just the truth of the matter. Even if you're a middle kid, it doesn't matter. Like, you are having to take care of the kids that are younger than you, or you are having to take care of yourself. You know what I mean? Now, if you're older, this is good. This is an ideal time to start your family. This is a great time because you will feel so much more dedicated towards them. You will feel so much more like naturally, like wanting to be responsible towards them. So this is an amazing time to settle down and start a family. Like, you know, it's hard when you're a kid and you're being parentified. It doesn't make much sense. But if you're older, or if this is your Saturn return or something, I mean, I think this is an amazing, you know, child indicator to have a child, like, because you really want to dedicate yourself to them. And it'll be hard, okay? But it'll be so rewarding. It'll be the exact kind of rewarding that you want. This can indicate a marriage, but specifically only for the children would be what I would think was, or for like the home. You know what I mean? To be able to live together, or to be able to move in for the kids, or because you're pregnant, right? That's kind of the reason I see this kind of marriage, right? Or because you want to start a family. But be cautious if you're getting married that it's like not just because you want to start a family, but because you really love that specific person. Just be aware. And if you have 7th house stuff or 5th house stuff, or maybe, you know, 10th house stuff, then you're okay. But just putting that out there. Like, transit wise, it can indicate that it's like actual love is what I'm saying. Buying a house, making up a house, dedication to the family, moving home, your family being dependent on you. That's a big theme. This transit is not about outer achievement. So that's why this transit can be hard, because Saturn is all about outer achievement, okay? This is about inner achievement, inner strength, inner resolve. The growth that you go through in Saturn, the 4th house, is quiet. Most people might not see it unless they live with you. And if they live with you, they're probably not giving you credit for it, because they're probably the reason why you're having this transit, right? So it can feel, even though it's not invisible like the 12th and 8th house, it can feel quieter. It can feel a little bit like it's going on more behind closed doors. And so it can be hard because you don't really have a diploma now to show that you've grown up and you've graduated. You don't have, you know, a house to show that you've grown up and you've graduated. You've just maybe taken care of grandma for the past 6 months and cooked for her and cleaned for her and supported her while going to work. And, you know, there's not an award you get for that. You know, you just get that inner feeling of self-responsibility and that inner feeling of self-growth. I'll bet you anything, when my boyfriend was going through this, his dad was sick, and I think he was having to take care of him and work 2 jobs and pay for the rent and pay for everything, basically. So just putting that out there. This is a deeply psychological transit. This is also solidifying not only your roots or finding out where you came from, but also working on creating your inner identity. Feeling like your identity is challenged, especially in the home, you must grow past it, or despite it, or through it, or with it. Probably with it. Probably Saturn wants you to grow with it. You know, not saying you have to become what they want you to be, but saying that you have to grow alongside of it rather than trying to push against it. Okay, issues facing attachments to the past. May not want to grow up despite that being exactly what you have to do. You know, this is very much the person that has to play mom that's really looking for a mom. During this time, though, I will say, it really did shake my family's stability, but it showed me that despite that stability being shaken, my parents are responsible enough to make sure that they always have our rent paid, and that they always have my back, and things of that nature. And that, you know, we can count on my grandparents or things of that nature. Like, Saturn in the 4th house can show like, wow, I do always have a family to come home to, you know, or it can give you that feeling, wow, you know, even though my parents might have, you know, struggled to make rent this month, their parents were there for them. That shows, you know, this generational legacy, like, support that was really, like, great. I felt like, for me to see. I was like, oh my God, I feel so supported and loved and taken care of, even though I maybe not given that emotional support, I'm given it in a very Capricornian material way that makes it so I kind of get to do what I want because I know I have a house over my head, which in a good way can show Saturn going through the 4th house. I got bat mitzvah during this time. I thought that makes sense. Anyways, you can feel really alone during this transit, even if you're around your family. You know, you might, you know, feel like there can be a lot of isolation or just a lot of feelings of, you know, aloneness, or even some depression can come in during this transit, so keep in mind. It can also feel like you can't relax at home. Like, okay, I can never describe it, but it was like, it can feel like there's this stiff, unseen Saturnian presence. Like, just like how there can be this like constant like Plutonian presence where it feels like there's like cameras everywhere, you know what I mean? There can feel this constant like Saturnian presence where even though you're not getting grades at the end of the week, you feel like you're going to get grades, you know, and you feel like everybody's kind of, you know, like, does that make sense? And this might not, if you're single during this transit as well, like, right, this can make sense. Like, if you're coming from a divorce with Saturn in the 3rd house, I wouldn't be surprised if you're single during Saturn in your 4th house. That's okay. This is a good time to be single. And you're going to want to beat yourself up for being single during Saturn transiting your 4th house. Like, I'm not saying you are, but I'm just saying if you happen to be single during Saturn transiting your 4th house, you're going to beat yourself up for it, but don't. This is actually an ideal time to be single, to build that inner strength, that inner resolve, and that inner independence. Saturn transiting through the 5th house. So again, we're coming from the 4th house. Now that you have cultivated a home and you have grown roots, all that stuff that I said in all of the past houses, right? You've built that up. It is now time to have kids, or celebrate your kids, or watch your kids grow up, or go out and have fun with your kids and celebrate Christmas with them. And you know what I mean? Put them in after school activities and teach them things. And oh my God, it's like, you know, it's like that kind of vibe, right? Another theme is now that you have learned the lessons of your family and you have understood the obligations of your family and the expectations of them, it is now time to learn the limitations of how they also halted you creatively and through your self-expression, and how they also are stopping you from having fun. Saturn in the 5th house is like all that fun stuff that you still had as vices while Saturn was in your 4th house. Saturn going through your 5th house is probably going to clear it out. Saturn in the 5th house is like if you were gambling but still building a home while Saturn was in your 4th house, Saturn in the 5th house, you're going to reap that. That's going to become a problem, right? If, you know, or whatever the example is, right? When Saturn transits your 5th house, basically it's trying to teach you your lessons about how you express yourself, how you have fun, how you enjoy yourself and your hobbies and your interests. It's also kind of time to get more serious about them as well, right? So if there's something that you've always wanted to do, but you've been a little delusional about thinking that you've been good at it, Saturn in the 5th house will tell you, yeah, this isn't going to last any longer. I'm pretty sure just as Saturn entered my 5th house was when I was like, yeah, I'm going to quit dance. I'm going to tap because I'm an amazing tapper, but this other dancing stuff, I'm not flexible. Like this is not for me, you know? And that was something that I had to accept and learn and grow, because I realized that if I kept spending all my time in dance classes, that it was just a waste of time. And in the long run, even though I enjoyed those classes so much and I had so much fun in them, those classes were not productive. And I was getting older. This was when I was in high school. You know, that was when I was like, no, tap is what I'm good at. Tap is fun for me. So it's something that is reasonable to spend all my time doing, right? Or at least to spend a lot of time doing. What is also interesting though is when Saturn was going through my 5th house is that I had tendinitis the whole time because I had used my knees too much and I was tapping so much during that time. I overdid it. And I had tendinitis and it restricted my ability to tap, which is very Saturn in the 5th house, you know what I mean? But I'm also so thankful for that transit. Like, I know it sounds bad, but it was like, no, I needed to quit dance. And I was so mad that it had taken me that long to do so. I was so mad that nobody let me do that. Like, it was finally because Saturn went through it that I put my foot down, which is very Saturn. But yeah, restriction of fun. And that can look like a lot of things. Like, I know this video is just a long video of complaints, isn't it? But that's Saturn, you know what I mean? I went through this when I was in high school, and I remember feeling like, what the fuck, why am I felt like it was almost like I didn't know about astrology in high school, but I felt like I knew I was going through it in high school, because that's when I was like 16, 17, I'm pretty sure, 18, and I was trying to drink and I was wanting to party, and it was like, oh my God, it halted me at every step of the way, and I was so frustrated. I remember feeling like it literally feels like the world does not want me to have fun. It feels like the world, like I am trying to have fun and I'm trying to find fun. Like I've been locked up, you know, with Saturn in my 4th house. Like I'm trying to finally go out and, you know, have fun and enjoy myself and be a kid, and I'm like not allowed to. It felt like I had to fight against the world so much to be able to get that fun, but it felt really worth it and it felt really rewarding. And I look back at that time and I'm so thankful that I did, honestly. But yeah, there's a real restriction of fun. You know, again, life starts to look a little bit more serious. This could be a point of age maturation. Like I think like, you know, I was 18. It makes sense when I was going through my Saturn in my 5th house. Like this would make sense if you were like 30 and you were going through this, you know what I mean? Or like one of those kind of milestones, you know what I mean? Like an age milestone. Because I do think there can be a feeling when Saturn goes through your 5th house of getting older. Does that make sense? Like whatever that means to you, like, oh, I'm old now. Like when you're 18, you're like, I'm old now. I'm officially an adult for the rest of my life. I will never go back to not being that. You start taking how you express yourself more seriously. Maybe you start, you know, really focusing on how you dress and how you display your hobbies and your talents and things of that nature. Maybe you take it more seriously. Maybe you get something published. Maybe you get something, you know, maybe you get your name in, like, I don't know, maybe there's just some, I just feel like Saturn in the 5th house, right? Like if you've ever wanted to get something published, this is the time. You know, this is a very like magnum opus energy. If you've ever wanted to get some kind of creative project solidified, sign with a record deal, whatever it is, I don't know, major record label, I don't know. You know, this is kind of like the time to do that. You know, this is the time to create and cultivate your magnum opus, because you can really focus and put a lot of energy into your hobbies, into your talents, into your abilities, into your activities, into your expression, right? So use that and take this time to really pour into those things and try to get something established out of it. That's really what this transit can reward you with. You're going to be constantly studying your hobbies and your activities. You know, you're going to probably be getting an insane amount of criticism and pushback from your creative endeavors, okay? Like I know during this time, like I said, I was in high school, the authority really did not like how I creatively expressed myself. And that was always what it was, is I would kind of think outside the box, or I would do something out of the box. I went to a performing arts school, and I would, you know, stretch the limits basically a little bit. You know, I would stay within the rules, but I would stretch them, try to do something creative, try to do something fun, try to put more energy into it, try to put more care into it. And it was always just translated as very disrespectful, very rude. I was blacklisted. They had me apologize to the faculty personally on multiple occasions. Sometimes I would, sometimes I, with some people I didn't. I always got criticism, but when Saturn was going through my 5th house, it was truly at another level. And it was so frustrating because it was when I was putting in my most time and effort and energy, and especially putting in a lot more time and effort and energy than I felt more than other people, which I think is true when Saturn goes through your 5th house. Definitely lots of creative blocks or writing blocks, and you're needing to learn how to push through them. Okay, you have to not let them block you, and you have to see it as an opportunity to get better. Authority can really rain down on your fun. Okay, so be cautious, right? Big milestones can happen in dating and fun relationships. You know, like this can be a placement where you have your first kiss, where you have your first hookup, where you have your first date, where you get engaged for the first time, where you get married maybe, where you this would be totally a time where you would like redo your vows or whatever that's called, right? Whatever the milestone is, it's so different depending on where you're at in your life, you know, what age you're at, but there will probably be some big milestone as far as dating and fun goes. Even if, you know, you're going through this for the 2nd or 3rd time, maybe you're somebody who you're like, oh, I went through a divorce when Saturn was going through my 3rd house. I was all depressed when Saturn was in my 4th house. But when Saturn goes to my 5th house, you're out on the dating sphere again, you know, and you're out on the town, and you're like, wow, you know, it's not my first time doing this, but it feels like it. I haven't done it for so long. You know, it's been, you know, 30 years since Saturn went through through my fifth house that, you know, it's like I'm dating again for the first time. It can be how it feels. My boyfriend has this placement natally, and when he went through his Saturn return, he actually met me, a very Saturnian person. So it makes sense. You know, a serious relationship with maybe some initial challenges or obstacles or setbacks can present themselves. You know, we were not living in the same state, and there was stuff that went with that, you know. This can also indicate a dry spell. Like, honestly, like this can be like a time where you're like, I have never had problems pulling, and all of a sudden I'm having problems pulling. And it can feel really weird, and it can feel like really disorientating if that's not who you normally are, if you have like Jupiter in that house or something. After this transit has concluded, you should feel like you have a stronger ego, a bigger backbone. People probably have made fun of you for things that you've worn, or I dressed ridiculously in high school, I didn't care. You know, maybe people made fun of you for who you were dating, or how you were dressing, or maybe people made fun of a performance or whatever it was, you know, basically you've been tested in your creativity. You know, maybe you've gotten something published and you've gotten some hate from it, as you would expect, no matter what it is. Not everybody's going to like it. How did you deal with that? How did you handle that, right? You should really feel like now if anybody were to critique your work, you would not give a shit. That's how I felt after I went through Saturn in the fifth house. Maybe your self-expression was challenged and ridiculed, you know? How did you handle the heat? Did you succumb to it, or did you rise above it and grow because of it? As I mentioned, there are some cold, hard truths about your creative expressions and abilities. Okay, basically Saturn in the fifth house is all about creative limitations. But in finding your creative limitations, you also find how far they go. Does that make sense? You're like, oh, yes, I found the end, but I didn't realize that there was all this stuff in between it here. You know what I mean? So it can be really rewarding because you can really realize where you should focus your energy, where you should focus your creative efforts, right? It can be so rewarding, but it can also be hard because you realize that you're not capable of doing everything. You're not, and you shouldn't be. And you shouldn't have to be. You don't have to be. And so instead of seeing that as some terrible, horrible thing, see that as like, well, now I know my strong suit. Now I can work on that. Now I can hone that and focus that and perfect that. Saturn in the sixth house. Perfect segue. That's so funny. Oh, also I said it can show someone, sorry, wait, hold on. This is important though. It can show someone who is struggling to get pregnant but has a real desire to. There can be lots of themes with that. Or it can show like a real, like, a very, very planned to the down to the T pregnancy. Also, like, again, can show being a parent and all those heavy responsibilities, burdens, obligations that come with it, specifically realizing that you don't get to have fun like you used to, right? And you also have to be the bearer of bad news. You have to be the one stopping all the fun, right? So maybe there's not an authoritarian presence ruining your fun, but you're being the authoritarian presence, ruining other people's fun, or more likely ruining your children's fun, ruining them because you have to teach them lessons. And that's okay, you have to do it. Are you gonna do it, or are you gonna be a little pussy ass bitch and not? And then they're gonna grow up and you're gonna be a pushover, you know? Also, nobody is as impressed with you as they used to be. That's another big theme with Saturn going through the fifth house. But yeah, it has to do with basically the realities and the consequences of fun and free good times. All right, so that random hookup might result in a baby that you now have to take care of for the rest of your entire fucking life. So, you know, it's one of those things. Basically, the fun that you have with Saturn going through your fifth house has consequences. Transit Saturn through the sixth house. Again, this is coming from the fifth house. So after having children, it is now time to take them to school, pack their lunch, teach them to read, etc., right? Another example is like now that you've had kids with Saturn moving through your fourth house, you had fun with them and played with them and, you know, all that kind of stuff with Saturn in the fifth house, and you had to, you know, come down on them and teach them their lessons, right? When Saturn moves into the sixth house, it's more about kind of clicking into that routine, that family routine, right? Maybe they start going to school. They start being a little bit more independent. You know, everybody in the family starts working a little bit more independently, right? Saturn in the sixth house, you know, this is about kind of that daily routine, that daily schedule, all that kind of stuff. After having the realities and responsibilities of fun come raining down on you, it is now time to grow up, get a job, get a house, and get a bed frame. Basically, no matter what phase of life you're in, Saturn in the sixth house is about taking care of, you know, dotting your I's and crossing your T's in ways that you have avoided and you probably haven't wanted to for most of your life. I absolutely hated this transit. I have 2 planets in the sixth house and I absolutely hated this transit. As much as I might talk shit about all the other Saturn transits, there's something about this one that I feel a deep hatred for. And I definitely went through harder things during my Saturn in my 7th, 8th, and 9th house transit. I don't know, there was just something so plainly, horribly mundane about Saturn moving through my 6th house. Basically, it made me sick. I was just basically sick the entire time Saturn was moving through my 6th house. I couldn't do anything because I was sick and bedridden. I couldn't eat because my digestive system was not working properly. It was a real burnout time, basically. Physically, mentally, health-wise, everything. It was a major time of severe burnout and severe health issues. It's very, very common to have chronic health issues and horrible health problems when Saturn is natally in your 6th house. So when Saturn goes through your 6th house, this can be a time where you have chronic health issues that you only have during Saturn in your 6th house. I had the worst celiac disease ever, only and exclusively when Saturn was going through my 6th house. And it did not make any sense to me. And also very Saturn in the 6th house, I did heal it by a nutritionist. Anyways, but you can't heal celiac disease. That's the thing. But it was gluten. That was what was the issue. You can be so restrictive as far as like your health, your routine, your diet, like your daily life, you know? A dietary change or focus is very, very common. An illness associated with the stomach is very common because it's the 6th house, or just mental health issues can sometimes be common. I was diagnosed with autism when Saturn was transiting my 6th house. That is when I figured out that I am autistic. Also, I think that this transit can be a big indicator for anorexia, bulimia, or some kind of disordered eating, you know, if this exists in the natal chart. So if you're somebody that you know that this exists within your natal chart, or this is something that you've dealt with, please, you know, make sure that you have outward support when your Saturn is going through your 6th house. And I know that sounds like weird to say. My health was so bad. It was so bad and I couldn't eat anything. Saturn in the 6th house, I felt like was forcing me to have an eating disorder I did not want, if that makes sense, because eating anything was so painful and was so horrible that it made me not want to eat anything, you know? And then I would go so long because I would be so hungry because I would just want to be able to get through the day, you know? And then I would eat so much, you know, that I would stuff myself and I'd feel sick because I'd be so hungry and I'd only have to want to go through it every now and then. Does that make sense? Like, it felt like I was like forced into a disordered eating pattern that I wanted nothing to do with. Like, does that make sense? If I wasn't in pain when I was eating, I would have just eaten like I normally did the rest of my life. So that's why I'm saying, like, if you're somebody where you think, you know, there can be some disordered eating themes in your natal chart, you need to be really cautious, because I've never struggled with this. And it was something I struggled with heavily during Saturn in the 6th house. Weirdly, I don't know. Another common theme of Saturn moving through the 6th house, like taking a flashlight and seeing the reality of health, doctors, the healthcare system, medicine, all that kind of stuff. You know, that was a big theme, right? Mental health, physical health, that came up with Saturn in the 6th house. I was really taught that you cannot trust doctors and that you just cannot trust institutions. I've said this before, this was during the time that I got scammed, and I was technically scammed by this girl who I'm pretty sure was a Gemini rising, but I always knew she was trying to scam me. So I asked the bank, and the bank basically verified, like, how do I put this? In short, the bank scammed me. Even though she scammed me, I called the bank up and said, hey, is this lady scamming me? And they said, no, they're not. She's not scamming you. We have the proof right here. And I said, okay, great. I'm actually surprised. I thought she was. So I went forward with it, and I wound up getting scammed out of money because it's a whole thing. So basically I learned that this was US Bank, right? US Bank lied to my face, not just once. Actually, they lied to me multiple times throughout many months. I came back and had to check in on things, and they said, no, you're fine, you're fine, you're fine, you're fine. It was a whole thing. Anyways, basically I learned to not trust big banks. I learned to not trust institutions. I learned to not trust doctors. I learned, you know, a big reason why I was having those health issues was because I was on antibiotics that a doctor had prescribed for me for many, many years. And it had really, really messed up my stomach and my digestive system. You know, I was like, why did I trust this doctor that put me on an antibiotic for my acne for like 5 years? Like, this is not good, and it didn't even fix my acne. You know what I mean? So this is a lot of personal stuff, but like, you know what I'm trying to say, okay? This is also another one of those transits where it's really common to go to school during this time and take it super seriously, or have an extremely hard time with it. Or it can be like you know, all you care about is learning. All you care about is, you know, growing your mind and studying. You know what I mean? And that's all that matters to you. And if you're not doing that, you can really need that focus. This was when I taught myself astrology as well. Lots of more pressure at work or harder hours at work can also be a big theme. Also just the theme of lots of work for no pay or for little pay or working below your pay grade, or again, lots of menial, mundane jobs and tasks and activities. You know, like I was a personal assistant during this time and I was like, yeah, this isn't for me. You know, you have to learn how to take care of yourself and your daily routine on your own, or you'll wind up wanting to do things independently during this transit, but needing to learn to rely on others for help during this transit. Like if you're somebody that only does things on your own, you need to learn how to ask for help, to learn how to give and receive help. As I mentioned, I got diagnosed with autism during this time. So what it can represent is like something that never had like closure for or a diagnosis for, that you've maybe been wondering about, can finally get closure or get a diagnosis during this time. You know, so if you've always had hip issues and you've wondered what that problem was, and no doctor's ever been able to figure it out, with Saturn moving through your 6th house, you'll probably have to take it into your own hands, do your own research, and diagnose yourself and figure it out for yourself, or something along those lines, or find a better doctor that you know what I mean? Like somehow you need to take things into your own hands a little bit more and basically like find a conclusion to something that has never gotten a conclusion for, especially health-wise. Lots of lessons in learning how to manage your time, okay? Again, this is when I was getting out of college also during this energy, and I remember this conversation that I reference all the time. My mom was talking to me on the phone and she said that and this will reign even more true as I get older, that the hardest thing about getting out of school is learning how to manage your time, is learning what to do with your time, learning what is worth prioritizing, learning what is worth putting your energy into. That is one of the hardest lessons with Saturn in the 3rd house. What little mundane tasks actually matter that you actually have to do, and what little mundane tasks are not worth your time. When is it worth helping somebody and when is it worth not? You know, all those kinds of themes. Learning how to grow up and take care of your laundry, do the dishes, get an apartment, all those boring things. This was something that when I was writing this, I was like, oh my God, I never put 2 and 2 together. Something that I never thought about that I'm super duper thankful with this transit was that I had to move a lot, even just within this like small transit. And I had to basically learn how to be able to get my own apartment and move myself. And I had to do that completely by myself. And since that time, because of that time I got scammed, it had to do with me moving. I feel like now, no matter what moving forward in life since that time, I will always be able to lock down some kind of rental apartment, some kind of rental house. Like I have full confidence in myself that I am able to do that. Maybe not financially, that was something different, but like the paperwork, you know, I have the credit score. I know how to put this stuff together. I know how to sometimes fake it till I make it. You know, I know how to put these documents together and be organized and find a place to live and just do that daily stuff. Take care of myself, take care of my routine. It makes sense that I was going through Saturn in the 6th house when I was, 21-ish, and I was really off on my own because I was really stepping up and learning how to take care of myself and take care of things in a way that I'd never done before. But definitely it's a horrible transit. You feel so bogged down by pressure, stress, anxiety. Everything of the 6th house comes raining down on you. Life is not fun. Life is so serious, right? Like even Saturn in the 5th house was so much more fun, a trillion times more fun than Saturn in the 6th house. This is great for cultivating, creating a healthy morning routine. Please, please, please just do not get too crazy about it. Please like bring in routine, bring in structure in your life with Saturn in the 6th house, but please do not get just crazy, like Nazi level, crazy about it. You have to allow some level of leeway, and it's so hard with this transit. There is a high likelihood with this transit of, taking new medication, taking new pills, but also with these health issues, when Neptune goes through the 6th house, it is imperative to figure out the spiritual meaning behind your health issues. When Saturn goes through the 6th house, it is imperative to find the spiritual lesson through your health issues, your spiritual lesson for, why these health issues are coming up. What do you need to learn? How are you not taking care of yourself right? How are you not taking care of yourself right? Neptune in the 6th house, it's that emotional stuff that you're not taking care of. With Saturn going through the 6th house, There's some way that you're not taking care of yourself practically that is being reflected in poor or ill health. And after Saturn goes through your 6th house, you have potential to be the healthiest you've ever been and take what you've learned and the discipline that you've created with Saturn in the 6th house and move forward. But also learn to not be too crazy about it. Like with Saturn in the 6th house, you can be inappropriate with how you're pushing your 6th house, routine and, health stuff upon others. You just need to build inner resolve and inner good health and not worry about what everybody else's health and routine and stuff is happening with them around them, okay? Saturn transiting through your 7th house. Okay, so we have breached another barrier here. You know what I mean? Whenever we hit one of the angular houses here, this is quite a big shift, right? Let's go down a little journey road, invisible road here, right? Like, 4th house, you have your kids and your family. 5th house, you start playing with them and having fun with them. And then 6th house, they go to school and they have a routine and you start getting into the swing of things, And then when Saturn goes through the 7th house is when you start to realize that your children, 1, have their own personalities, and 2, are a reflection of you. Basically, all the lessons that you have to learn through them, right? While Saturn was in your other houses, you taught the lessons. But no matter if you have kids or not, when Saturn goes through the 7th house, now it's time for other people to teach you lessons. Maybe you've gone through all of this bottom half of this Saturn, Saturn 1 through 6, and you have cultivated just a very, very high level of self-discipline in every way, but only coming from the self and only really, externally. Now, when we go to the 7th house, Saturn in the 7th house, it's more psychological, right? These houses from 7 to 12 are all very psychological, right? They're not as physical in the here and now. When Saturn moves through the 7th house, even if you don't have kids, you have friends, you have family members, you have people that have grown up around you, right? Saturn, how much are you willing to learn from the people around you? How much are you willing to teach them? How much are you willing to learn from it yourself? How much are you comfortable of kind of like swallowing and like taking in what people have to say about you as well? This can be a time of a lot of ridicule. This can be a time of a lot of maybe even like pointing the finger at you and blaming you for things and saying you did this wrong and you did that wrong. Like other people can be doing that and you can be doing that to everybody else. You can be saying this is your fault and this is your fault and you did this and you did that, right? And so with Saturn in the 7th house, it's a lot about learning your lessons through projection is a big theme. Now that you went through Saturn in your 6th house, now that you have a new routine, a new, way of going about your day, of doing things, procedures, methods, all that kind of stuff, do the people around you follow those same routines, follow those same, maybe even morals, follow those same schedules, Now that you've gone through Saturn in the 6th house, you probably feel like you've leveled up a little bit, I think is what I'll say after Saturn in the 6th house. After going through maybe whatever health issue you've gone through, I do think, and going into the 7th house, I feel like there's a little bit of a leveling up feeling. As there's with everyone, but this is a little different. It's to the point where you start reassessing your friends. Maybe you've realized you've changed and you've changed through the years, and people that you used to know as when you were younger, don't relate to you anymore, don't resonate with you anymore, aren't leveling up with you even, whatever it may be. Or maybe you guys are just going to different paths and maybe it's just as simple as that you just, you guys have been on the same train track and now things are diverting. With Saturn in the 7th house, this has everything to do with clearing out relationships and friendships that no longer serve you. So if you're going into Saturn in the 7th house, you probably already know the relationships that I'm speaking of. And relationships doesn't have to be romantic. It definitely can be, but it can be platonic, it can be family, it can be any sort of one-on-one connection of any kind, okay? So now it's time to reassess the people around you and see if they have grown and changed with you. And also not only that, like a big thing that I noticed when I was going through my Saturn in the 7th house that I learned was that not only do I have to ask the question, is this the best person for me in my life? But I also have to ask the question, am I the best person for this person in their life? Because sometimes somebody can be good for us, but that doesn't mean that we're good for them. Sometimes we can be good for them and they can not be good for us. And that's basically what Saturn is telling you and saying. And that was something that I had to figure out with a few friendships, right? That just because this works for me doesn't mean this works for them, And it's not about somebody being right or wrong, or a personality type being right or wrong. That's not what it's about. It's about just two personalities that just don't mesh with each other, or have both outgrown each other, or they're going on different directions, or they have different belief systems, or whatever it is. There's just needs to be a little bit of a separation. And with Saturn, you need to learn how to do it amicably. You need to learn how to kind of set boundaries with friends amicably and respectfully, right? And any boundaries that you haven't set in the past between friends or relationships are going to come up exponentially as a big problem. Now, I don't want you to get this confused. Saturn in the 7th house is not about those deep, soul-bound relationships, right? 7th house is more like those friends that have been really close to you for a few years, that relationship that lasted, 2 to 5 years, right? Like, this is going to be what's going to be assessed, right? Your high school friends, maybe you're getting out of high school. Which high school friends are going to last? That would make a lot of sense if you're going through Saturn in the 7th house, naturally. How you see others and how they see you takes a little bit more of a critical and judgmental lens. You will wind up being more critical and judgmental to others, and you may feel others are being more critical and judgmental towards you. I feel like very Saturn in the 7th house, like when Saturn was going through my 7th house was when I really felt like I got my astrology stuff more down to like a science, like when I was like, okay, this is how I feel about this placement. This is how I feel about this placement. I like these. I like this. This is my type. This is when people that I have problems with. Like, I feel like when Saturn was going through my 7th house was when I was really realistic with myself of like, I still wasn't 100% sure, but I feel like if you've been following me for a while, you kind of know a lot of my astrological opinions haven't changed about how I feel about each of the placements and the signs and stuff. And I feel like that's because they were solidified when Saturn was going through the 7th house, and it's just been hard for them to change since then. That was done through so much like analysis, and so much like heavy consideration, even though it just seems like goofy and silly and fun. Like really me trying to figure out and discern who should be around me and who I should not be around, and and so on and so forth, Also, a big theme is getting serious about what you want in a relationship and what you're looking for. It would make sense to get married. This is a huge marriage indicator. You're going to get more specific about what it is you really want from a relationship. Even if you're not an astrology person, right? You don't use it in that context, right? It's going to really help you focus yourself about what it is exactly you want from a partner, from a friendship, right? From a business partnership, whatever it is. There are also going to be so many reality checks about who you think you are, who you thought you were, who you really are, and all that also versus how people truly see you. And there'll be a lot of lessons in that way. It also is a way, I think also it's about learning how to grow up and treat people, you know what I mean, properly. Especially I think if you're really little and you're going through this transit, this would be something where you learn how to share. You learn how to talk to others. You learn how to socialize with others. You learn how to hold a conversation. Like things that like that are very 7th housey. There can also be a lot of themes of authority on a more one-to-one level that I feel like is very Saturn in the 7th house, where it feels like an equal or a peer is your authority, and they can really come raining down on you or be really harsh on you. And that can also come in the form of a romantic relationship. You can be with somebody that's more Saturnian or displays more Saturnian qualities, and they can be more cold, more distant, more hard to please, higher expectations, all that kind of stuff, wanting you to live up to what they think that you can live up to, very Saturnian. And your natal chart will tell you how you deal with this, right? How will you deal with somebody basically asking you to like step up to the challenge? How will you grow and deal with the demands that people are asking of you? You may feel more withdrawn. You may feel less relatable to people. You may struggle to be vulnerable. You may struggle to share what you're going through or what you're feeling at this time with others. Your circle will get smaller, but it's for a reason. You are weeding out the people that are nothing but superficial relationships or have become nothing but superficial relationships. Also, a big theme with 7th house is shadow work. Okay, so especially with Saturn, there will be a lot of lessons as far as learning about your shadow, learning about the side of you that you repress, that you ignore. All that stuff will come out. I know we think of that as the 8th house, but the 7th house is the direct shadow of our first, our identity. So I think that's why the 7th house has everything to do with shadow work. Others can seem hypercritical of you. Others can super duper rely on you, and you can also rely on others. And there can be themes of codependence. What you need to find when Saturn is going through your 7th house, and the lesson that you need to learn, is healthy interdependence, okay? It's all about learning how to find balance in relationships, how much to take and how much to give. But also Saturn in the 7th house needs to teach you to raise your expectations, right? You can go through a very challenging relationship or relationships of all sorts, you know, during Saturn in the 7th house, and it needs to teach you to raise your standards. It needs to teach you what you're really looking for in other people, and also you need to raise your standards in how you treat others. Relationships are not as lighthearted as they used to be. Lots of tests in relationships, right? This is a time in your life where you may be like, oh, I need to settle down. You know, if you haven't settled down in any of your previous Saturn transits, this is definitely going to be a time where you're going to look for somebody who has settled down so you can also settle down, right? You're going to look for that Saturn person to grant you security or stability, or somebody might look to you as that Saturn person to grant them responsibility. You know, it is that projection back and forth. Significant partnerships in any and all forms. I also will say this is the last years that I had my mom, which I feel like is very Saturn in the 7th house. The last years I had with her, it weighs very heavy like Saturn would. For Libra risings that are all going to be going through this transit coming up, Saturn and Aries, you guys deadass need to get ready. Like there are going to be so many lessons that you have to learn that others are going to teach you. You need to start listening, which I think you do listen, I will be honest, but you need to take them in, and you need to start teaching people lessons, okay? You need to learn how to take versus how to give, and when to give, and how to ask. You need to learn how to act selfishly, how to not care, and how to not care versus when to give and when to care. You need to find that balance. Also, I thought it was interesting that during this Saturn in the 7th house time, I did actually happen to have, that was the only time I had a therapist, which makes sense, one-on-one consultations, right? And I also, that therapist was a Capricorn moon, which makes so much sense because that was Saturn in the 7th house, you know, and a big reason why I stuck with her was because she happened to be a Capricorn moon. Also, I should mention when I was going through my Saturn in the 7th house, I quite literally lived with 2 other Capricorn stelliums during this time. You know, obviously we had completely different charts elsewise and different moons, but we were all heavy Capricorn stelliums. Saturn in the 7th house is really learning about how you interact with others and puts a lens on how you treat others and how you allow others to treat you. Okay, that's like kind of the main theme, right? But now let's go into Saturn in the 8th house, transit Saturn moving through the 8th house. So we are coming from the 7th house. Now that you have kind of, you know, sorted through the muck of your relationships, you have really kind of narrowed it down to the people that are close and that are important and that have been there for a long time, or that you think are going to be there for a long time, okay? So now how will you yield the power that you hold in their life, okay? How will they wield the power that they hold in yours, okay? Now that you've connected deeply with others, what will you do if you lose one of those people, like literally or metaphorically? This can deal with death. I did lose my mom during this transit. It is really literal for me. I don't think it's definitely not literal for everybody out there. This is definitely a situation where it's like, okay, like now that I have this relationship, this partnership, what happens when we merge finances? What happens when we merge items, merge houses, merge souls, right? And you know, now that we're married, everything is joint. How will we work together as this one person, this one unit? So even if you don't literally have a marriage, you can feel like the lesson is learning about how to merge with somebody, how to share, and how to share those joint finances, those joint things, those joint secrets, all that kind of stuff, that joint connectedness. This can be really hard, serious stuff with Saturn in the 8th house. It can also put a little bit of like a dual depressive undertone. This is another one of those energies that can do that, kind of in a similar way to Saturn in the 4th house. You know, Saturn in the 12th house will do it too, just because it is Saturn in a water house. So your emotions are a little bit more Saturnian whenever you have Saturn going through a water house. You know what I mean? Not even just a water sign, specifically a water house, okay? Because that is where you hold your emotions. Even if your water house is with an air sign, you deal with your emotions in an air signy way. You know what I mean? So that is your, like, you know what I mean? So this is, I think, that one of the biggest indicators of if you are going through a little bit of a depressive time, it's probably because of Saturn in the water house, especially Saturn in the 8th house. If you are feeling very hopeless, or just like what's the point, or just like discouraged, or just very 8th housey depressed, this too shall pass. You know, I will say that with this transit, that is the beauty of transits, is that they don't stay with you forever. So it's not going to be something that you have to learn to manage forever. It's just something you have to learn to manage for this little bit of time. I think we both know you can do that. This is kind of like being left behind in a state of emergency and having to grow up and deal with it yourself. You know, maturity through death, maturity. Maturity through losing a piece of yourself and growing out of it, being that phoenix rising from the ashes. But specifically with Saturn, it does have a lot of family implications. It does have a lot of father implications. You know, now that my mom is gone, it was only me and my dad left, which is very like Saturn in the 8th house. That can be very scary. It put a lens on that relationship. It didn't really work out. For me, when Saturn went through the 8th house, it kind of cleared out all the relationships that Saturn in the 7th house did not. And I don't think it's going to be as extreme or severe for you, because I think it's rare that people wind up with, you know, nobody in their life. And, you know, for me, it was that severe where it cleared out every single family, friendship, relationship I had, except for one friend that I've kept since high school. So, you know, when Saturn was moving through my 7th house, I still had a lot of people from my childhood and my family around me. But when Saturn moved through my 8th house, I had absolutely nobody, and that friend wasn't even living near me. It kind of got rid of everything, right? And I actually wound up you know, losing the security that I had, that had been built up for me all those years. The security that, if you watch the whole video I talked about, that was built up for during Saturn in the 4th house, I lost when my Saturn was transiting through the 8th house. So that can be a theme as well. There can be a real loss of security from the rug being pulled out from under you. It does kind of feel like, similar with Saturn in the 6th, where it just felt like the chronic health issues never stopped the entire time, you know, it was going through it. It just felt like more and more rugs kept on being pulled out from under me when Saturn was going through my 8th house. Like, it felt like it didn't stop. Does that make sense? It was definitely, you know, one of my harder Saturn transits for sure. But I will say that my health was very, very good during this time. And I know that sounds weird, but I was just reeling so hardcore from my Saturn in the 6th house transit. I was just so happy I could like go out and like do things, you know what I mean? Even if it was COVID, I was like still capable of like doing something, you know, that I just was like, I feel like I was a little desensitized to some of the transit, to some of this energy in a way, if that makes sense. Deep, deep isolation. If you think Saturn moving through the 7th house is isolating because your circle is so small, Saturn in this 8th house has the potential to make your circle so small it doesn't exist. What would you do if all you had was yourself? Will you be able to rely only on yourself? And again, this can go in different levels of extreme, and this will show up differently depending on what stage of life you're in, as a side note. You know, for me personally, I moved into isolation and moved away from the city for the first time in my life. I wanted to get away from people I didn't know and have more space. And I was actually really happy seeking that kind of solitude, especially during Saturn in the 8th house. I lived in the mountains and it made me very, very happy. However, what is interesting is that I lived with somebody very Saturn in the 8th house that did not like it and was a real curmudgeon during this time. And it made me be really pissed off because I was just trying to enjoy this space and the peace and the breath and the solitude, because I knew I wasn't going to live there forever and I didn't want to live there forever. And this person would not stop complaining about it. And I was like, I am trying to enjoy it. Also, there can be some major financial problems. Like, there can be some major financial losses, or there can be some major financial gains. This was also a time when I was not making as much money steadily as I'd been at all times in my life. Like, even when I was 16, I felt like I was making more money steadily than during my Saturn in my 8th house time. I was really struggling to work mostly. I was very sad and depressed because Saturn was in my 8th house and I lost my mom. But I wound up randomly getting money. It's probably, now that I'm thinking about it, I'll bet you it's my mom that did it. She was passed, but you know what I mean? Like, I was getting random money from random things all the time. Like, I would get I would get like checks in the mail for things from my past, or like I was getting like random insurance money that I guess it was very, very strange. Even though I was struggling so much, there was this like outer guidance sending me help. Do you think was directly from my mother trying to help me because she wasn't able to help me in the way that maybe she wanted to when she passed, you know, because of things. Lots of self-introspection and reflection. What are you going to do with all the stuff that you discovered about yourself, your loved ones, and your family while doing the shadow work, right? Family secrets being uncovered and being kept secret from you still, even when you try to bring them up. That's another thing, family secrets. And with Saturn, it can be like hyper restrictive, right? Like I remember I found out some family secrets and I would try to talk about them and people would still deny them or still not want to talk about it, right? Now that you've found your other half, how do you guys deal with these North Sea-like disasters together? That's another theme of Saturn in the 8th house. It can feel like you're being kept isolated in a cage. It can feel like you can't escape. You might even feel comfortable in your cage, honestly. Lots of lessons in how you assert yourself with others' money and how you give your money away. Lots of lessons in how you handle death and serious events versus how you should handle death versus serious events. This is another one of those things where hindsight's 2020, and you may go through some serious events that you wish you had the know-how and the like things that you would learn after the transit. But that's the whole point of the transit, and that's how you should feel fulfilled. You should feel like after you get out of that Saturn in the 8th house transit that you know how to handle loss. You now have learned your lesson and you know how to go back and do it better. And if the opportunity presents itself again, you know the steps required, both on a very like emotional lens of the 8th house, but also from a very Saturnian lens. Like I know what to do to make sure that things get settled how they should when someone passes, right? I know what I should do emotionally more now than I did before Saturn went through my 8th house when somebody passes, right? I understand those contexts more. And I understand the truth of death a little bit more, or the truths of death. At least I understand that death is for the living, basically, which is the truth of death, you know? How do we use our power? How do we use and wield our sexual power? How do we use and wield our intimacy? How do we become intimate with ourselves and others? We can only become truly intimate with others when we become intimate with ourselves. And Saturn in the 8th house can have a lot of blockages towards intimacy. This can be a time where you really struggle to feel like you're able to be open and get to know somebody. This can be a time where you put a lot more walls up. Intimacy can be harder. You can feel like you want to be more protective of yourself or more elusive or something along those lines. Also, accessing our deep-seated habits that refuse to let us fully be free and express ourselves, which perfectly goes into the next house, which is transit Saturn through the 9th house. It is time to break free from this metaphorical cage that you put yourself in, okay? It's also giving like a little bit of like, you know, maybe there's some empty nest syndrome. Maybe your kids have, you know, grown up and gone to college and done their own thing. And during Saturn in the 8th house, maybe you had some empty nest syndrome. But now that Saturn is in the 9th house, you've realized that, you know, life doesn't stop at the age of 50 or 60. I don't know, I'm just kind of like making up how this can feel. You know, even if you're not 50 or 60, it can feel like that, you know? When I got through after my Saturn in the 8th house, I was like, might as well be 50 or 60 at this point, you know? So yeah, there can be this feeling of like, you know, like, let's enjoy our retirement. So to me, this is very much like, I am tired of being a bird trapped in a cage. It is time to break free. I have been depressed. I've been sad. I've sulked. It's time to try to put myself out there a little bit more. Now, I'm not saying you're going to get over everything that you went through when Saturn was in your 8th house immediately, but there is a little bit of like, it's time to go outside kind of energy in the very least, you know? When Saturn moves into your 9th house, this is dedicated to self-improvement and higher self-understanding, right? I told you that I started to get more into occulty, witchcraft things, right? Saturn in the 6th and 7th house was much more astrology. Saturn in the 8th and 9th house was much more tarot, witchcraft. Like I got more into books of all kinds of sorts of divination. I just got more interested in religion and belief systems. And, you know, I even learned a lot about like, you know, where religion came from and Christianity came from, like all that kind of stuff I got very, very interested in, especially when Saturn was going through my 9th house. I think I was also going through the end of a progressive Sagittarius moon. So this really double down on this energy for me, at least. Learn your lessons through running away. It's kind of what I said. Will you be able to support yourself through a more nomadic life? Basically, I left California and ran to my current boyfriend in Las Vegas. We lived in an RV and he is a Sagittarius sun with his natal Saturn also in my 9th house. I thought it was so Saturn in the ninth house of us to live in an RV for a while, right? You know, because Saturn in the eighth house took away a lot of that stability and those stable, close relationships that you had built, Saturn in the ninth house can basically be like, okay, like what kind of life will you create if you have no strings attached, you know? Now, sometimes this can also have to do with going to school. Like straight up, this can be 1000% an energy where you just go through a really intense, like, you know, like Saturn in the seventh house, eighth house, you know, teenage time where you're angsty and you're getting new relationships and they're breaking your heart and your parents are projecting all the shit onto you and you're projecting all the shit onto them and you're like, I'm leaving mom and dad, I'm going to college. So you run off to college when your Saturn goes in your ninth house and you break free from the cages that were built for you. That I think is the most kind of, very expected way that this would translate as well. Maybe you go off to study the thing that your parents didn't want you studying when your Saturn was in the eighth house that you were learning about. Maybe you go off and learn that thing and Saturn in the ninth house. Anyways, I also think Saturn in the ninth house deals a lot with in-laws and extended family. Already the ninth house, I think, deals with in-laws. So when Saturn comes in, oh, this is like in-law city, right? I said I was living in an RV. Many of you guys know this. When Saturn was going through my ninth house, I was living in an RV, but where was that RV located? It was at my boyfriend's dad's house, okay? But we could not use the amenities because Saturn in the ninth house, right? He was really controlling. So how Saturn in the ninth house manifested for me was that even though I shed all of my relationships and attachments and like my disciplinarian figure, my father, not only did I run away from California, I also ran away from my father as well. But I ran into another father figure, which is my in-law, unfortunately. And it was really, 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 really frustrating to me because I had this really strong Saturnian authority figure my entire life. I finally got, you know, some space from him, and it was really hard to get some space from him. It's not really what I wanted. And then I have this other random new super Saturnian, you know, he's a direct reflection of my father. He, you know, Scorpio, Pisces, you know, Pisces, Scorpio energy going in there. And I'm now having to deal with somebody else's father, kind of like an in-law, doing this to me, like being that Saturn presence. And I'm not even related to this guy. I'm not even trying to date this guy. That's what I would always say. It was like, it feels like I'm dating your dad too. And I don't want to date your dad. I only want to date you. That's what I would always say. You know, I'm not dating your dad for a reason, you know? So basically felt like I had like a surrogate dad, which I think can be very common with Saturn in the ninth house. Saturn in the eighth house is another one of those things that can indicate a divorce. So it would make sense if Saturn in the eighth house, you get divorced, and then Saturn in your ninth house, this could be a major indicator of being remarried. This could be a major indicator of getting a step parent. I actually did get a step parent when Saturn went through my ninth house. I got a stepmom. I just didn't know about it until months and months later, and I still haven't really met her. But I do have one, and I did get one when Saturn went through my ninth house. Learning that with great freedom comes great responsibility. You know, basically I had nobody, right? And that meant I had total freedom and I could do whatever I wanted. And so what do you do, right? It was one of those things where I was like, I could go wherever I want. Where do I go? I could do whatever I want. What do I do? The thing of like, you need to be discerning. You need to discern what you want for your life, where you want your life to go during this time. Because if you don't, it might wind up going in a direction that you do not want it to go. I think this is a time when you can really shuffle the cards and reassess things and change things. So make sure that before Saturn moves into your 10th house, you like the direction that you're taking your Saturn in your 9th house, if that makes sense. Because things can really, this is one of those Saturn placements that I think life can really propel forward really quickly. No matter what state you're at, I think this is one of those, like, after a long time of things feeling very stagnant with Saturn in the 8th house, things just woo, you know? There can also be a change of politics or belief systems. There can be a deepening of a belief system or even a rejection of a belief system. Maybe you're rejecting a belief system that you used to have and replacing it with a new one, you know? And also I think there's a theme of like going back to your core with Saturn in the 9th house, going back to your core fundamental beliefs, the beliefs that give you stability, the beliefs that give you security, the beliefs that have always been there, the beliefs from your childhood, right? All that kind of stuff. But also you're learning that some of those things that you learned as a child we're dumb and they're outdated and it's time to grow up, you know? And it's time to basically just be discerning. You need to start being discerning about what you believe, what you think, what your higher beliefs and opinions are, right? Picking one belief system or subject or area of studying and diving in, whether you go back to school or not. There, you know, even if you don't go back to school, this is a time of self-study, of self-courses. This might even be a time where you become a teacher or you become a professor. Maybe during Saturn in the 8th house, you became obsessed and fixated and concentrated and got your grad degree on something. I don't know, I'm making stuff up. And then when Saturn goes through your 9th house, you're now teaching that thing. You're now a professor. You're now, you know, you're not just being a teacher, right? Always on the run. That can be as well. You can feel like, I felt like for the first time in my life, I was seen as a rebellious, outlaw, lost child at the age of like, what was that, like 25, 26? And it was just so disorientating because I was like, I have been nothing but like a Saturn child my entire life. And now all of a sudden I am this like, I don't know, I was just seen as like this 9th house character and it was very funny to me. I was like, I don't know what you guys are thinking. And I tried to tell everybody and I think they were confused. Anyways, college can be hyper demanding and hyper stressful if you do go through it during this time. You might really learn what it means to actually study something, okay? Lots of travel. Again, with Saturn, there can be restrictions or limitations. Like I did not have any money to travel, but I traveled all the time. So it was lots of cheap travel in my Toyota Corolla, sleeping the night in my car, but lots of nights spent in cars and RVs, all that kind of stuff. So, but travel will be a theme, but there will be some kind of restriction for some reason or another. Like it would make sense if you like this happened to you when you were in COVID. Like if like you were off in college during COVID and you were like studying abroad and you had to go home, you know, because of the whole COVID stuff, that would make so much sense when Saturn was going through your 9th house. You know what I mean? Stuff like that. Saturn in the 9th house, sticking by your belief system despite everyone disagreeing with you. When Saturn went through my 9th house, I was exposed to conservative belief systems that I had never been really exposed to before in my life. And I thought I maybe had, or you think that you are when you're on the internet. You're like, oh yeah, I know all about the conservative stuff and what it's like, but you don't until you actually go around those small towns, live in those small towns. And it's been a big thing also seeing not only the differences, but also there are way more similarities than people would ever want to admit. But anyways, there's lots of lessons as far as that stuff goes, right? The harsher their opposing views are around you, the stronger you must stand by your own, right? So I was around all these car guys that basically have no opinions even relatively similar to mine. You know what I mean? And basically I had to have the challenge of basically still believing what I believe despite other people not believing it, right? Learning and growing your rebellious side, redefining what freedom looks like to you, understanding what it feels like to have no grounding, no stability. Also, this is just a random tidbit to close it off. From a personal basis, it makes so much sense how this was kind of like my first Saturn transit. That's something else to keep in mind. Like look at your natal Saturn, look at the house before it. I do think that is a little bit of an indicator because that's like the thing that you've had your whole life that you've never had to deal with, that it can be like, it felt like these past few years have looked nothing at all, even relatively like the rest of my entire life has looked. And a part of me feels like it is because of this Saturn going into this house that I always felt like was always going to be there. Saturn moving through the 10th house. So this is my natal Saturn placement, as many of you guys know. I am actually going through Saturn moving through my 10th house right now. I feel like I remember Saturn transits 1 through 9 very strongly, but definitely don't remember my first initial Saturn 10 through 12 transits, you know? Definitely way too young. Anyways, so coming from the 9th house, we're redefining what stability and your future looks like to you after running away from everything you'd built up until this point, basically. Also, I feel like another way to look at it is like after retiring, what legacy will you leave behind, right? Now, maybe you have the empty nest, traveled with your partner, you've seen the world, you've, tried new things, tried new hobbies, studied the things that you never got to study, and now maybe your children are having children, right? Maybe your children are settling down a little bit, like maybe they're starting to build a family, or maybe they're starting to, build a legacy or something. And, it's kind of out of your hands now. That can be another thing with the 10th house, because I think the 10th house has so much to do with legacy, right? So while the 4th house is the family in your home, I feel like 10th house is like your children's children and so on and so forth, right? Now that you have your degree with Saturn going through your 9th house, how are you going to put it to use, right? Basically, we're going into the job field when Saturn moves into the 10th house. Now, obviously, that doesn't mean it's not like you're only in the job field when Saturn goes through your 10th house, but that is going to be a big major focus. That is going to be a big highlight, but not It's not the job field. That's a little more sixth housey. It's more about like your career, right? What do you, if you don't have children, if it's not your children's children that are your legacy, maybe you're trying to cultivate a career, right? You just got this degree, you're established, and if you haven't got a degree, you now feel like you have some like, some years in your studies, that you have some like backing to you, you have a little bit more oomph to your name now, right? Saturn in the 10th house is all about creating this legacy, right? Even just in weirdly filming this video just now, I was taking a break a second ago because these transit videos are insanely long to film. It's already been almost 4 hours that I've been filming this, and all I've done is taken a break to eat a bagel. And while I was eating that bagel, I was like, why do I go into such specifics during these videos? Like, why do I have to say everything? And why is it that when I feel like I miss a sentence out or I miss an angle out, I get like so upset and angry? Or like, I'm like, ugh. In all honesty, I'm trying to get it all out because I don't want to die with this information. You know what I mean? Like, I was like, it's like a legacy thing. It was like, I just want all my thoughts about this astrology stuff out there, right? I don't want to die without these thoughts being put out there and somehow, hopefully permanently or semi-permanently left behind so people can add to them, because I love astrology so much. I'm like, I just want people to take my findings and go even farther and propel astrology even more forward, because I think it's an amazing thing. For the rest of a lifetime, we'll always be figuring it out. We'll always be adding to it. And I want to be somebody that adds to it, and I think it's so beautiful. So basically what I'm trying to say is that's like my Saturn in the 10th house, right? And then I was thinking about how perfectly that aligns with Saturn in the 10th house, right? Like that's my version of how I'm wanting to leave a legacy right now with my Saturn moving through my 10th house. So this is all about redefining stability as well. Redefining how you see your future life and what you want for your future life. Serious and deepening commitment to your job. Time to go out and actively create the life you have always wanted and dreamed for yourself. This is Saturn's home placement. So this is truly no time to chill. This is not like Saturn in the 8th house where if you take a few years off and you go into hermit mode, I am not going to blame you. In fact, you should. But during Saturn in the 10th house, this is not, in my opinion, the time to do that. This is the time to be putting yourself out there as much as possible. This is the time to really cultivate that career, that job, that personality even that you've always wanted to out in the open. Externalizing your personality too with Saturn in the 10th house, right? Like whatever way that means to you. There also is, again, freedom in knowing ourselves and our limitations comes up with Saturn in the 10th house. Saturn teaches you to be discerning in your career. What is worth your time and effort and energy and what is not? And I know you guys have heard me say that has been a thing on my mind. Like that has been my major theme since Saturn went into my 10th house. And I've talked about throughout this whole video, right? It's all about what is worth your time and what is not. That's what Saturn says. It's all about being discerning. You know what I mean? It's not about all saying yes, all saying no. It's about discernment. I have all these things I want to do, but which things are worth my time and energy and effort and which are not? There's going to be lots of pushback authority-wise from bosses, from higher ups, from omnipotent TikTok beings, for example. There's just going to be a lot of challenges authority-wise. There's a thing of Saturn in the 10th house where there's an extraordinary amount of outer authority coming down on you, but Saturn in the 10th house holds an insane amount of inner authority. And that is why the outer authority is coming down at you, right? That is kind of the Saturn in the 10th house thing. During Saturn in the 10th house, you will start to be your own authority. Not in a first housey, teehee way. That's mean to say, but I don't know how else to say it. But in like a 10th housey, like you are your own authority of your past, present, and future. I think it has a lot to do with taking responsibility for yourself and your actions and what has led you to this life course so far and owning up to everything, all that kind of stuff. Because it's going through your 10th house, it's about stepping into the image of yourself that you always knew you could be. Because the midheaven is like our highest idea of ourself, when I really do the thing, I'm gonna be my midheaven. I'm gonna be what's in my 10th house. If you have a Taurus midheaven, I'm gonna be the ultimate Taurus. If you have a Gemini midheaven, I'm gonna be the ultimate Gemini, whatever it is, and so on and so forth, right? So when Saturn moves through your 10th house, it's time to step into that. It's time to become that thing that you've always known you can be. It's time to become that. But that can be very challenging. That might be met with a lot of pushback from yourself, from others. It can be very hard to assert yourself in some way. okay? There are also going to be high expectations of you. You have now set the bar high after gaining accreditation of some sort when Saturn went through your 9th house. Will you step up to the challenge or will you crack under the pressure, right? Saturn in the 10th house also talks about discipline in our career, commitment to our career. Can you do this thing day in and day out and put in 110% every single time you do it, no matter what, no matter how tired you are, no matter how bad of a mood you are, no matter what's going on in your life, right? That's what Saturn in the 10th house is all about, really. It's a want to take your life trajectory into your own hands. Completing your magnum opus happens in the 5th house, but gaining respect and adoration for it comes in the 10th house. So it's kind of like you've spent all these years, since Saturn in the 5th house, if you're old enough, right? You've kind of like found your barriers, you found your limits, and you found, okay, this is what I can work with, right? These are my talents, this is what I got to work with. Maybe they'll grow and mold and shift a little bit, but this is pretty much it, right? And when Saturn goes into 10th house, it's like, it's basically gaining that respect that you've always wanted for that thing. If you're able to focus yourself and use this energy. You know, do you have the diligence and routine in order to support your job and your career path? And also, do you have the support? Saturn has a lot to do with material support. Do you have the like material support behind you to go after and do what you want in life, like in a career? This can even speak to maybe you're having kids that are creating their own life outside of yours. Maybe you're having to go back to work after being a stay-at-home parent for so many years. Maybe you're getting a big promotion and you're really having to step into a very public time at work, whatever it may be. It can even speak to kids growing up and growing older and gaining their own independence. Like, you know, it makes sense. You know, what goals and expectations will you put on them? So maybe you have a child that you just put through school. Now, what goals and expectations and how will you help them navigate life, right? Maybe you become that authority for them. You become that Saturn in the 10th house for them, and you teach them those wise old life lessons that you have learned throughout your time here. You know, are you going to share them or are you going to be selfish with them, right? You can be the authority now, maybe with your children or in your job or even in your relationships, depending. Especially in Aries, it's all about, you know, you setting the rules and becoming your own authority, gaining security and stability in your job. Our standing in society comes under intense scrutiny. This can be a time of a lot of, again, like not only just pushback from your bosses or authority figures, but it can also come from a lot of pushback as well with society. That's a little bit more Saturn in the 11th house. But I do still think there is a certain amount of like ridicule, public ridicule that comes with Saturn in the 10th house, because when you're putting yourself out there, it is going to be ridiculed and it is going to be looked after and looked through with a fine-tooth comb. Saturn can be a real hater, especially in the 10th house, especially in Aries. It can feel like anyone of a higher authority than you is trying to take you down. Now, a big thing with Saturn in the 10th house that I have found is that, you know, having this placement my whole life, it's not a peer-to-peer issue. I rarely tend to find that I have issues with my peers. It always tends to be issues with people that think they're of higher authority to me. I really don't have issues with people that are of the same authority to me or are comfortable within their authority. You know, it's always like for example, I really feel like on TikTok, yeah, I have haters here and there or whatever, but my real problem comes from TikTok, the omnipotent TikTok beings. My real beef is not with the people that follow me. I love the people that follow me. I even love the people that hate on me. I really don't care. But my real beef is with the authority, you know, and even in jobs and work, it was always that way. I was like, I love my coworkers, but I cannot stand my boss or something like that. This is basically the time to take the career spotlight, okay? Will you step up to the lessons, all right? This is not the time to cut corners at work. Everything that you do will be looked at under a microscope. Also, this is the time, I think, to start saving for your future. Like, it's still Capricorn. There's still some financial components. This is the time to start making smart, fiscal, long-term decisions, okay? Saturn is all about discernment. So if you were doing a job that you do not love and is not worth your time, Saturn will sweep out anything that is taking your time rather than benefiting you and your time, okay? Midlife crisis is so common with this energy. This is such a midlife crisis energy, quarter life crisis energy, whatever you want to call it, whatever age you're going through it at, I think it does feel like it. Because it is square the 7th, I also think there might be a want to be single and married to your career, or your career might be so demanding that you feel as though you have no choice but to be married to it, even if you're married to somebody. There can also be that, you know? Basically, you're dealing with your highest self expectations, and you're seeing if you can really level up and step up to it. It is, I think, I mean, I'm probably biased, but I think it can be the most rewarding Saturn transit. That's totally my bias though, because it's my natal placement, so I'm gonna feel that way. I also feel like it has a lot to do with like the harsh realities of your career, the harsh day-to-day disciplines of your career, the reality of what it takes to do your job. Yes, this is another one of those things because it's going past another angular house, Saturn in the 10th house. This is another one of those like new stage of life sort of energies as well, right? Whenever we hit an angular house. So this is a great time for a reassessment of your goals, a reassessment of your commitments, a reassessment of where your life is going and where you want it to go. You definitely, I think, need to take this transit seriously because I do think this is a transit that sets in motion what you're going to leave behind after you're gone, honestly. The 11th house, Saturn transiting your 11th house. So coming from the 10th house, now that you've established yourself in some way, shape, or form, it appears to seem you know what you're doing. It is now time to teach others and spread what you've learned to the plebeians. I mean, the younger generation. Potentially, you saw a lot of career success with Saturn in the 10th house, and now you are running with higher echelons of society with Saturn in the 11th house, and you now must learn how to assimilate into this new established society. In case you notice, there is kind of like a theme with like Earth house to air house, I think, of kind of like somehow establishing yourself and then somehow making the energy around you and the people around you reflect that. Does that make sense? And this is really coming into play with this energy. After seeing your children grow up and have children, it is now time to go to a retirement community and pass on your wise words to those around you, right? Very Saturn in Aquarius. You're the water bearer. You're saying, yes, this is what I have learned and let me give you this. It can even be a thing where it's like you've been the boss of your job for a really long time, and maybe when Saturn goes into the 11th house, you maybe step down a little bit and have somebody else take your side. And so you're passing the water down, you know, on to the next generation in some way, form, or shape. I think is very Saturn in the 11th house, right? You have found the interest in yourself in the 8th house. You have studied it and gotten accreditation in the 9th house. You have cultivated your identity and your job and your career path based on that information. And now it is time to spread it to the masses and have other people start sharing it and get other people to get the word out. Now that you have a different authority over your life, do the circles that you run in reflect that? This is another one that can lead to some isolation. With great success can sometimes come isolation and unrelatability, right? Now that you're, maybe you're at the top of your career after Saturn in the 10th house, and now people just find you very unrelatable. There isn't as many people to talk about. There isn't as many people that interest you. Maybe you've seen the truth of your career field and you're like, oh, this is gross. I don't want anything to do with this. I reject these people. I'm doing this on my own can also be a theme. Also, I think there can also be like a transplanty theme with Saturn in the 11th house. So like if you're a young kid going through this, kind of like Saturn in the 9th house can indicate moving. So can I think Saturn in the 11th house, but I think Saturn in the 11th house is more like Saturn in the 9th house is more physical and belief system oriented, but Saturn in the 11th house I feel like is more cultural. There can be some real cultural shifts and cultural changes that happen if, within the realm of moving. Like maybe you move when Saturn comes in the 9th house, like to a different country, a different place. And then when Saturn goes through your 11th house, maybe it's like you trying to learn to assimilate, but realizing that your customs and traditions are very, very different to those that are around you. I think that's also like a big, big thing with Saturn in the 11th house. There can be this feeling of like ostracization, feeling that you don't fit in, feeling like everybody else is so different, especially culturally and the way that you were raised to you know what I mean? Now that you see the world more clearly and have truly grown up, you need your beliefs to reflect that, right? This is one of the, radical political belief sort of energies. 9th house is more spiritual, religious, whereas 11th house I think is more political. I think there can also be a change of friend groups, potentially even because they do or don't reflect the political beliefs that you now have. You also might get a lot of backlash and hate for those political beliefs, and you're really going to have to learn how to defend yourself or even defend your culture, defend your way of life, despite it. Yeah, way of life. That's like very 11th housey too, I feel like. May find that you need to learn how to establish boundaries and roles in your friendships friendships and communities, right? There needs to be a little bit more of lines drawn in the sand between you and your communities. Like maybe you even like run an online forum and there's a lack of boundaries. With Saturn in the 11th house, you'll need to set stronger boundaries there and have more privacy. What does all of this success mean, right? Might be something you ask with Saturn in the 11th house. I feel like that's a very 11th housey question, right? What does all this success mean? And what does all this success mean if I have no one to share it with? I think is also a thing. Not just romantically, specifically friend-wise, specifically group and community-wise. What does all this success mean if I do not have a group or community to share my success with, that shares my success along with me, right? This can be a time where it really clears out superficial or disconnected relationships. You can feel like you don't really have any family, or you can feel very unrelatable to your family as well. You can feel like you're being raised more if you're younger during this time. You can feel like you're being raised more and supported by your community that's around you than your actual immediate family. Or this can even be a time where it's like if you're young, like, and you were going through this transit when you were younger, this is total like Tumblr days. Like maybe like a phase where you find these really bad communities on Tumblr, right? Like that's like Saturn 11th house vibes. Like there can be some real dark paths that you go down, and you can have really weird beliefs you really have to defend and be strong about it. It definitely can be a very like internet-y time because you feel so isolating and because you feel so different to your family that and you feel like their expectations, I feel like the expectations become a little bit more distant. This is another one of those the man sort of energies, but it's the government the man, not the financial the man, right? I think they're two different things. Feelings of alienation, like you have to think of this as a very Uranus thing for me, right? Because it's like Saturn in the 11th house to me is very like the actual Greek god Uranus, because wasn't he pushed to live in isolation because he protected the humans or something, or he like helped the humans? He was forced to live in complete like damnation and exile for forever, which to me that's like kind of a little bit of the vibe of Saturn in the 11th house. Like how dare you help these people? How dare you help these people that need help? How dare you try to better their community? You are exiled. I feel like it's very Saturn in the 11th house. Also, you might start to see the crack of social relationships. You can read people better and more honestly. I think this can be a very smart energy. I think this can be a very smart energy socially. If you're going through it in your transit, it can really make you very aware, like I said, of all those social implications and all those social rules. And it can make you very, very aware of everybody's social standing. And it can be kind of hard to see that stuff, and that can be what's so isolating about it. Concentration of a certain aesthetic or belief system or group. This is also like an energy of like, I've got friends in high places, with Saturn specifically in the 11th house. Neptune is like, I've got friends in low places. You know what I mean? Saturn in the 11th house is like, I want friends in high places. You know what Saturn transiting the 11th house is? Like, I'm watching Real Housewives of New York. I'm only on the first season, but I think her name is Alex, and she has that kid Francois. She is giving all the Saturn in the 11th house vibes. She obviously, I mean, I think she's like a Libra sun, Sagittarius moon. That's my guess. But it's giving like this Saturn in the 11th house transit. Like, I feel like when that first season was aired, this is the transit that she was going through, especially after she had just like made some kind of like business or something. Like, it just makes sense to me. All she cared about was being friends with people because of their status. And she was very blatant and very open about it. She was like, all I care about is like social climbing. And I was like, okay, I mean, at least you're honest. Being friends with those that have matching higher beliefs and ideals to you, and getting rid of the ones that do not match up with your life's trajectories and beliefs. Saturn in the 10th house, it does have the potential to give you like life's biggest physical material goal, like material goals that you've always wanted. And so 11th house Saturn can give you like your biggest, grandest wishes. We can't physically access anything bigger and grander than the 11th house. I really do think with Saturn in the 11th house that your biggest wishes can be granted, especially like socially, like your social status, things of that nature also will come out. So I think a big theme is like, if you have like fans or supporters or people that admirers or something that you maybe built up when Saturn was in your 10th house, this can be a situation where you're kind of trying to live up to everybody's expectations of you. This can even be a situation where, you know, you cultivated these insane expectations with Saturn moving through your 10th house that everybody now has on you. And then in Saturn in the 11th house, you can feel like maybe there's some pushback, maybe there's some harsh public acclaim, harsh situations like that. It can even be just like in your local kind of community or online or something along those lines. This has a lot to do with reputation, I think is what I'm trying to say. And also there can be a lot of really big world events that affect you. This can be a placement where it's like you become a refugee or something because of some world event or something that is political, that's outside of your, control. This can be a major indicator of that. Let's move into Saturn transiting through the 12th house. So first we're going to talk about coming from the 11th house. So after much life expansion, I feel like you've really worked yourself and really put yourself out there after your 9th house, 10th house, and 11th house Saturn. You're tired. You need to retreat. Okay, this can even be like mental health issues after overworking yourself for so long, right? This can even be a time where you maybe have really isolated yourself after Saturn in the 11th house. And when Saturn goes through your 12th house, you search this deep inner solitude and this deep inner security and safety. It's kind of like giving me the vibes of like the Capricorn that hides after the height of their success to go live in the mountains with the goats and the woodland fairies. Like, that Capricorn stereotype. It's giving like that's that part. Like this is that part of the Capricorn trajectory, Saturn, right? You reached all the claim and heights with the 10th house. Maybe you realized it wasn't all worth what you thought it was with the 11th house. And now maybe you really kind of like saw the highest sides of society and met all these people and realized it wasn't it all cracked up to be. So now you are retreating to, again, become a woodland fairy somewhere or a lumberjack or something like that, right? I mean, it doesn't have to be literal, but it can feel like that, 11th house Saturn can concentrate and focus your views and can even point to conspiracy theories that lead you into psychosis, right? Like you may have, that was a little bit of a funny way to put it, Shaina, but it's a little bit more just like you might have these really strong conspiracy theories, these really strong belief systems, these really strong political beliefs, and you may feel like you cannot express them. You may feel like you have to keep them to yourself. You may feel like ostracized after it all kind of situation, and you might feel also like you're the only one that understands this. And so how do you deal with that? You know what I mean? Loss of friendship so much that you go into a deep isolation, right? This is like monk-like vibes. I said even, we went to the retirement community when Saturn moved through the 11th house, and, Saturn in the 12th house is when you die and get reborn, metaphorically, or maybe literally, but metaphorically, okay, moving into Saturn in the 12th house fully. So again, transit Saturn in the 12th house has very elusive goals. This is definitely the most unclear Saturn transit. After such concrete goals in the 10th and 11th house, you must start looking inward and making your deep spiritual self happy instead of just everyone else and your outer image. This sense of self-discipline, it's all about your inner self-work, your inner self-critic. You can be really, really, really hard on yourself during this time, and you can be your own worst enemy. There can be also like a lack of Saturn externally in your life. Maybe because you became your own Saturn when it moved through the 10th and the 11th house. Now that you're like, I'm my own Saturn, there's a little bit of like if I don't do anything, then I don't do anything kind of quality to it. You know what I mean? Like there can also be like when I said elusive goals, like you may be in a situation where your authoritarian presence isn't very clear and concise in the way that they are expressing what they want or need from you. Like the life goals can feel very unsure and elusive. The expectations that are placed upon you can either feel like nobody's placing any of them upon you, or you're only placing them upon yourself, or they're being placed upon you but you don't understand what they are or where they're coming from, and it can be very confusing. This might be a time where you have a very restrictive or modest or controlled religion or belief system or internal thing going on. You know what I mean? Like your inner God can be a little, a little strict, a little hard on you right now during this time. You might even feel like you need to hide your religious views, your spiritual views, or your religion. Again, this is the death before the rebirth, so there needs to be some kind of loss of fear, so that you're prepared for when Saturn comes through your first house, and you're able to kind of take on that scrutiny that comes with it. You need to build this strong inner resilience. You need to know who you are, know what you like, know where you stand, know how to take care of yourself, have this inner resolve for your Saturn in your first house transit when everybody's going to start pointing their finger at it, right? There's a real harsh inner critic. This can also talk to elusive mental health or physical physical health issues, okay? This, isolation nun vibes, all this stuff, right? Contemplating the meaning of life, existence, death, external goals and failures, going through darkness of the soul in complete isolation, learning all of your lessons by yourself without any help, learning your lessons without any external support, okay? This is simply the end of a cycle, but the head of the snake bites its own ass for a reason, okay? Things will continue on and the cycle will start over. So there's no need or no reason to get hopeless during this transit. It'll last at most like 5 years, but probably for most people more like 2 to 3, okay? So this is just simply a time of deep soul searching. This might be a time of loss. This might be a time of spiritual reflection. This might be a time of isolation, all those themes. There might be a lot of hidden enemies or lovers kinds of things. Who am I going to die? Who do I want to die with? It can also be like a thought, but it's only going to last for a few years. So don't get to, like I've mentioned in the other water houses, Saturn going through a water house like the 12th house or the 8th and the 4th. This is a little bit of a depressive period, okay? Everybody goes through these times. Everybody goes through depressive periods. So I just want you to know that if you do not have a natal chart that you feel like leans towards depression, like if you are not natally inclined to being depressed and you are going through this Saturn in the 12th house transit and you're feeling depressed, please do not get too worried. This is just a transit, and I really do believe it will pass. I do think that sometimes with Saturn depressing transits, it's just about powering through it and like embracing the sadness, embracing the hopelessness, because maybe there's something that it's trying to teach you. Maybe it's trying to it's trying to have you reassess and reassert your goals. You know what I mean? This is also a time where you have to listen to the world's winds. Does that make sense? Like hear the signs, hear the lessons, right? Like karma will come. Does that make sense? So if there's something that has happened in your life where somebody did something bad to you, somebody got something over on you, which is a very 12th house theme, do not feel like you need to go and give that person their karma. When Saturn goes through the 12th house, their karma will come to them without you even trying to do it. So this is a time where people will wrong you, people will fuck you over or scam you or try to pull the wool over your eyes or say that you're something that you're not or say there's something that they're not or, there can be a lot of, that kind of energy with Saturn in the 12th house, not good, authority figures. You will want to seek retribution. You will be obsessed and fixated with seeking retribution for the people that you believe have done you wrong, right? There's going to be a lot of elusive things. Did this person do me wrong or did they not? Is this thing love or is this not? Is this or is this not? Is this a long-term thing? Is this not, right? There are going to be a lot of situations that try to, 12th house to you. Like there's just weird social situations, I think, with 12th house, elusive things, and you just need to let karma work itself out on its own, okay? And you also have to understand that I believe that when you're going through your 12th house Saturn, if you try to put it into your own hands and you don't trust the universe and the way the universe wants to, reap people's lessons and reap people's rewards, you have to just go with it. You cannot control. This is not like Saturn in the 10th house where you control your own destiny. Saturn in the 12th house, you need to let the destiny control you, like dead ass. Like if you try to fight against it too much, you know what I mean? Like you try to I'm going to get retribution and karma on this person. I seriously think that when Saturn goes through your first house, you will see the demise of you doing that. Does that make sense? Because while Saturn in the 12th house, karma does not happen swift and quick. When it does happen like that to you when Saturn moves into your first house. So just be careful that you can be building up some shit that Saturn has to throw in your face during your 12th house Saturn that then comes up during your first house Saturn. Does that make sense? And honestly, you need to find a place in yourself that enjoys this peace and solitude, right? This can also be a time where you're desperate to try and find peace and solitude, but there's no way to find it. So when you do find it, enjoy it and honor it. You will need to take more time to decompress after work. You will need to take more time to decompress after socializing. You will need more sleep. You will want to eat more. Things of that nature, and that's okay. Okay? I also think in a weird way, 12th house Saturn is about clearing out your addictions, clearing out your dependencies, okay? In any way, form, and shape. Any addiction or dependency that's not serving you, which is probably most of them, will be tested and will be cleared out. This is a real, drug addiction, AA sort of thing, especially if Neptune's coming here too. Stay safe out there. Okay, this can also be a time where you're super duper restrictive of your escapism, where you're super duper, I see a lot of times people with 12th house Saturn natally are I've never had a sip of alcohol because alcoholism runs in my family and I am not doing it. That tends to be a very, very common theme with Saturn in the 12th house, or just being afraid and cautious towards alcohol because alcoholism runs in the family. So when Saturn transits through your 12th house, there can be this real cutoff of alcohol, anything, resistance from anything. This can be a real sober time for you, honestly. And if you're not sober, it might be a good thing to embrace during Saturn in the 12th house to try to be sober, honestly. Your goals to become more elusive, and you may even wonder what all of this is for. I said this is a great time to become a yak herder. That's true. So that's been on your to-do list. Saturn in the 12th house makes us look at the skeletons hanging in our own closets. The more you deny them, the more Saturn will force you to confront them. Okay, so if you're trying to avoid the lessons that come from isolation, Saturn will force you into isolation whether you like it or not. Things from years ago can come back to get their retribution. Things from lifetimes ago and karma from your ancestors can come back to get its retribution, and you must answer for it. Sucks to suck. We all have to do it sometime, and this is your time to have to do it. Focus on your mental health. Focus on the mean things you say to yourself and changing the narrative of how you talk to yourself. Because I think that Saturn in the 12th house can create a really critical mind. That's why it can lead to depression. Growing yourself internally rather than externally. Okay, this is all about focusing on inner spiritual growth. This is not a time to be concerned about financial growth. This is not a time to be concerned about buying a house. This is not a time to be concerned about those things. This is time to, again, build your inner monk up. You know what I mean? Whatever that means to you. Learning your human limitations on every level. I do think this is another one that can indicate a little bit of a feeling of aging, especially when Saturn goes into your first house. There's a little bit of that reborn feeling. So you might feel a little old when Saturn goes into your 12th house. Ignoring your problems. That's another thing that can come up with Saturn in the 12th house. Like, you might really, really try to just ignore or avoid your problems, especially your inner problems, the inner work that you have to do. Oh, la, 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 I can just live on top of it. Nope. Saturn in the 12th house will make sure that you confront it. And listen, if Saturn in the 12th house doesn't, Saturn in the first house will. Saturn in the first house will. Do not worry. Some common self-study fields are things like astrology, but also like any kind of therapy of any sort is very 12th house Saturn to me. Hypnotherapy feels a very 12th house Saturn. I don't know why, but that's just been on my mind recently. Anyways, self-analysis, any kind of like spiritual thing that deals within self-analysis. It's not giving Christian though. Like Saturn in the 12th house, if it's giving Christian, it's giving like full on none. Like it's, you know what I mean? Like it's got to have like Buddhism, I feel like is very, that's why I keep saying like monk, like Saturn in the 12th house, like I need nothing, you know, kind of vibes. That's why I was like, this is not the time to buy a house, you know, buy a house in Saturn in the first house or literally any other Saturn transit, genuinely, except for maybe like Saturn in the third house, you'll probably be moving. Anyways, burnout. This is a major energy of burnout, so watch out for that. Finding inner peace, which is truly just inner contentment. And that's what you might find with this energy, is that finding inner peace is just finding inner contentment with the self. And then when Saturn goes through your first house, how can people criticize you when you have accepted yourself, when you have loved yourself, right? But if you do not do the work that Saturn in the 12th house requires, then when Saturn goes through your first house and everybody's critiquing you, you will crumble under it. Okay, now that you've accomplished everything you've set out to, rest. Rest. Contemplate. Philosophize, study, wonder with a capital W. Keep these thoughts to yourself though. You don't need to share them yet. You know, this is all about the contemplation. This is all about the rumination. You know what I mean? This is a time of rumination, I think, right? Where should we go from here? Taking a step back and kind of wearing your monocle. But yeah. Oh, and then we start over again at Saturn in the first house. So you can just start over this video, keep watching on an eternal loop, right? No, I'm just kidding. All right, so that is Saturn transits through the houses. If you want to check out any of my other videos and kind of like these series that I've done this with Pluto, I've done this with Neptune, I'm doing this with Saturn, and I'm about to do this with Uranus. They will be linked up in the cards. That playlist will be linked in the card up here, and it just like has all the videos. So if you're curious about any of them, I've done Pluto transit through the houses, that's in there. I've done Neptune transit through the houses. But yes, again, I sell birth chart readings on my website, shainaemily.com. I have an astrology TikTok at shaina.emily and a backup TikTok at shaina.emilybackup. Thank you so much for watching. I really would love, absolutely love, love, love to hear your own personal experience and your own personal anecdotes about your Saturn transits that really stood out to you, or maybe something, you know, struck you when I was talking about it and you were like, oh my God, you know what is another connection? This. I love to hear that, guys. I really do actually appreciate it. I really do hope that this video helped you kind of understand a little bit more about Saturn transits through the houses, maybe have a little bit more of a, you know, like of a purpose as you're going through them, hopefully. You know, like, okay, this is my goal as I'm going through my Saturn transit. So instead of focusing on all the negative, focus on that goal that you're trying to get through. But yes, anyways, thank you so much for watching, guys. All right, bye.